Cleopatra, the most beautiful and dangerous woman in history. The temptress who bewitched the most powerful men in the world, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. This is the legend passed down to us in myths and movies. But is this the real Cleopatra? Or is this the fiction created by her enemies? Today, new evidence is revealing a different Cleopatra, magnetic, ambitious, and visionary, a daring queen who nearly conquered the world, the real Cleopatra. For 2,000 years, Cleopatra has been a fascinating riddle.
She's something about whom we know very little, except that it's irresistible.
But behind the myth, a remarkable personality lies hidden.
Cleopatra dreamt of universal empire. She wanted to be queen of the world.
40 years before the birth of Christ, one woman threatens the mighty Roman Empire.
They were worried because she was something larger than life, something mythic, something terrifying, yes. She was supposed to be sexually indefatigable, something that has fed the tradition from then until Cecil de Bede-Mille.
But seduction is just one of her many strategies.
Cleopatra seems to have been an extremely good self-publicist. What she used was a kind of grand theatre.
To find this new Cleopatra, we must look beyond Greek and Roman propaganda and unlock the Egyptian evidence.
The story of Cleopatra has been preserved for us because Western scholars have always been able to read Greek and Latin. We've not been able to read Egyptian hieroglyphs until 1820. And we are now beginning to sift through and review the ancient Egyptian evidence. By looking at the Eastern and Egyptian sources, we're getting a more complete picture of who the queen was.
She is the queen of a nation nearly as old as civilization itself. The pyramids of the pharaohs are as ancient to Cleopatra as she is to us today. She is Greek, not Egyptian. Cleopatra is born in 69 BC, the third of 6 children, a member of the Greek dynasty, the Ptolemies. She is raised in Alexandria, then the largest and most opulent city in the world. From her father, King Ptolemy XII, Cleopatra learns of the glorious conquests of her ancestors. Cleopatra's story really begins nearly 3 centuries before her time, with Alexander the Great. He conquered Egypt and most of Asia, burning with the vision of a united empire of the East and West. After his death, one of his generals became king of Egypt, Ptolemy I, the first of Cleopatra's royal line. The first 3 Ptolemies expanded their empire far beyond Egypt's borders, but by Cleopatra's time, the kingdom has shrunk drastically and is deep in debt to Rome. Most of Egypt's neighbors have already been swallowed by Rome's expanding empire. Cleopatra's father bargains with Rome to keep Egypt free, but his people see him as a Roman puppet. Public anger drives Cleopatra's father out of Alexandria. Her elder sisters steal the throne. Both are murdered. Her father raids the treasury and pays the Romans a king's ransom to buy back his throne.
Cleopatra's a young girl at this period, but must have been impressionable. And so when she saw what Roman might, military might, and what Roman money were able to bring to the table to further the cause of her father, who was eventually restored because of this, she realized that in order to further her goal, she too needed Roman money and Roman might.
She will never forget the lessons of Roman power. With her sisters eliminated, Cleopatra is now directly in line for the throne. She's educated as a potential ruler according to the most advanced Greek curriculum.
She was clearly very intelligent. According to Plutarch, she spoke 9 languages. This is possibly an exaggeration, but she was certainly, for instance, one of the first one of the Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt to bother to learn to speak the Egyptian language. Her forebears all spoke Greek, and only Greek.
And also, of course, what we have to think about is that she was the child of 3 centuries of consistent incest. And the interesting thing about repeated incest is that while it can sometimes produce the real village idiot, it can also concentrate the genes wonderfully, which it obviously did in Cleopatra's case. I mean, it threw up a real concentration, a cocktail of brilliance in her.
We do not know who Cleopatra's mother was. The most likely candidate, her father's first wife, his sister. There is a long tradition of brother-sister marriages among the Ptolemies.
This whole business of sister wives, what I think of as whiffsters, it's partly inherited from the pharaonic tradition. It's partly religious. But even more, I think, it was a form of self-protection in a period when it was very difficult to trust one's outer siblings.
When Cleopatra's father dies, he leaves his kingdom to 18-year-old Cleopatra and her 10-year-old brother. The young queen quickly takes charge. She faces huge challenges. She wants to keep Egypt from being swallowed by Rome. And someday, perhaps regain the lands her ancestors once ruled. The Cleopatra of legend is a spoiled, frivolous young woman, but the Egyptian evidence presents a very different picture.
I think Cleopatra was a serious queen. We've got a series of decrees that she passed which showed that she was really concerned for Egypt, that she was dealing in a very positive way with the problems that faced the country. There were a couple of years when the Nile was really low and corn was in short supply.
Only the flood of the sacred Nile stands between Egypt and starvation. But in the first years of Cleopatra's reign, the Nile fails. There is hunger even in wealthy Alexandria.
She sent out an edict, it survived on papyrus, saying that no corn was to be sent up the Nile to the south, where perhaps the prices were higher. All corn was to be sent north to Alexandria. She was concerned to feed the people in the cities of her country, those who had no access to food.
To her Egyptian subjects, Cleopatra is a foreigner, a Greek. To win their loyalty, she realizes she must embrace the ancient religion of the pharaohs. She will not only worship their gods, she will become a god. Hieroglyphs record her first dramatic public appearance. Within a month of assuming the throne, she travels far up the Nile to lead a native procession dedicated to Bacchus, the bull god.
The sacred bulls were very important to Egypt. They represented the fertility, the strength of the country.
Her subjects must be deeply impressed. On the engraving, she is called a goddess. One monument shows us Cleopatra ruling alone, dressed as a male pharaoh, worshipping the goddess Isis. We know it is Cleopatra from the Greek inscription.
There's none of this nonsense about her and her co-ruler, her young brother. It's her. She knew where she was going right from the beginning.
It is not the path her father had intended. There had been powerful women in the Ptolemaic dynasty before Cleopatra. But none dared to claim the throne for herself. Cleopatra has no intention of sharing power with her brother. But her ambitious plans cost her dearly. Egypt's young queen is driven off the throne by her brother's supporters. She takes refuge among the desert tribes. But she will be back, with the most powerful man in the world as her ally. September 48 BC. As Cleopatra raises an army in exile, the new strongman of Rome sails into Alexandria harbor. Julius Caesar has come to collect the huge debt owed to Rome by Cleopatra's late father. For Cleopatra, the Roman is both a dangerous stranger and a possible ally against her brother, the teenaged king. As Caesar lands, anti-Roman riots break out. Caesar is not easily scared off. He occupies a royal palace, demanding money and an end to the family feud. He summons Cleopatra and her brother. To avoid her brother's forces, she has herself hidden in a carpet and smuggled into Caesar's quarters. A dramatic entrance that has caught the imagination of the ages.
And it's quite possible that this story is true. It's become the basis for hundreds of more or less pornographic representations which show Cleopatra springing out of this bundle like a kind of dancing girl out of a cake. And it probably wasn't quite like that. But the story is quite well attested, and it describes a young woman of terrific courage and aplomb.
Caesar is 52, a seasoned military commander, a brilliant politician, a scholar, a married man. Cleopatra is only 21, but the attraction between them is immediate.
Caesar was a well-known womanizer. There's a song that his legionnaires used to sing, "Home we bring our bald whoremonger, Romans lock your wives away." They were very proud of the fact that he was a conqueror of women as well as a conqueror of countries.
You know, the whole relationship of Caesar with Cleopatra I find a fascinating one. I mean, here was a man whose sophistication was enormous, who also had a reputation of being sexually subtle, which most Romans were not, and who had a razor-sharp mind, which indeed she did too.
Sometime during the night, Cleopatra convinces Caesar to support her cause against her brother. Sometime during the night, they become lovers. So how did Cleopatra win the mighty Caesar? Legend tells of her irresistible beauty, but the historical evidence says otherwise.
Well, the only contemporary descriptions we have of her, which is second-hand, but it says that she didn't have the kind of looks which inspire passion. She seems to have been capable of inspiring passion, but by other means.
Plutarch says, if you went into a cocktail party, you would not notice Cleopatra, or no heads would do a double take when she entered the room.
Nearly every image of Cleopatra from her own time has been lost. Only 3 busts remain. This is the most flattering. The hair swept back into a bun, the large nose, and the wide royal hairband identify the queen. But is this depiction accurate? Busts of this period were often designed to make a political statement, not to capture someone's likeness. Coins issued during Cleopatra's reign provide our best clues.
The coins were minted on her orders and presumably had her approval. They can't have been that unflattering, so I think one has to assume that she did look something like that. Although the coin images they're pretty crude, so I think they should be seen more as caricatures than as accurate likenesses.
The coins may be crude, but they do share some common features. A determined brow, a generous mouth with a curved lower lip, a long nose. Modern animation gives us a glimpse of what the real Cleopatra might have looked like.
Everybody wants to know what she looked like. I always remember Pascal's remark about if Cleopatra's nose had been shorter, the whole face of the world might have been changed. She had the Ptolemy schnoz, which was always strong.
What the queen lacked in looks, she made up in personality. According to the Greek writer Plutarch, she was magnetic, her conversation fascinating, her voice a sheer delight.
And in that fateful moment when Julius Caesar comes to Alexandria and meets Cleopatra, it isn't the old man and the sex kitten as Hollywood and some of our Western playwrights make, but it's a man who looks at this ambitious woman who is as ambitious as he is. And I think the relationship was, on the one point, a meeting of the minds. There was this dynamic chemistry. They both were after the same thing. And that might have intensified the sexual relationship. I think it's a multidimensional relationship that sex was not the component element, although it must have been very, very good.
The morning after his liaison with Cleopatra, Caesar decrees that brother and sister should be reconciled and rule Egypt together. For a few weeks, things are peaceful. Caesar settles down to life in Alexandria, sampling its many intellectual pleasures. But peace does not last. Supporters of her brother, king, ignite a bloody civil war. After months of fighting, the forces of Cleopatra and Caesar prevail. The teenaged king drowns in the Nile. Again, Caesar restores the throne to Cleopatra. Her surviving 12-year-old brother is made her husband and co-monarch. But in effect, she rules alone. When the war ends, Caesar leaves Egypt. Soon a son is born to Cleopatra. The people of Alexandria quickly nickname him Caesarion, son of Caesar. A coin shows her suckling the infant in the guise of the goddess Isis with her son Horus. Isis is the most popular deity in Egypt, the all-powerful goddess of 10,000 names, who ensures the fertility of the land. To her people, Cleopatra becomes the living reincarnation of the goddess herself.
And in presenting herself as the goddess Isis, she was presenting herself in a very positive way, as her subjects would have understood it, in a way which is almost diametrically opposed to the way she's been remembered, not as the irresponsible temptress, but as a mother figure.
When Cleopatra sails to Rome with her young son, Caesar invites her to set up court on his estate outside the city. The Romans are both scandalized and fascinated. Whether Caesar acknowledges Caesarion as his son is not known, but his esteem for the boy's mother is clear. In the new Temple of Venus, he places a golden statue of Cleopatra. A bold statement indeed. Venus is the Roman version of Isis, the mother of all the Romans. Caesar is honoring Cleopatra as a queen in language that touches his people's hearts.
You bring this woman into Rome, you install her in a garden, in a temple dedicated to Venus, a woman who, in her own culture, can be identified with Venus. So what in fact he's saying, and the elite would have understood this, is, hey, Romans, I'm bringing your ancestor back home. Now, that fits in very, very well with Caesar's agenda for aspiring to universal power.
Some historians speculate that Caesar and Cleopatra were formulating a spectacular blueprint for an empire, one which would unite Rome, Egypt, Europe, and Asia under their joint rule. But while Caesar dreams of world domination, his own people fear his growing power. Rumors spread that he intends to abolish the Senate and rule as king. In 44 BC, on the Ides of March, conspirators attack him in the Senate. Mighty Caesar falls. Cleopatra's dreams fall with him. She has lost her lover and her protector. Caesar's will makes no mention of her or Caesarion, naming his great-nephew Octavian as his heir. It is time to go home. A few weeks after her return to Alexandria, Cleopatra's co-ruler, her young brother, is dead, probably murdered on her orders. She elevates 3-year-old Caesarion to share her throne. Egypt's queen and Caesar's son. Together, they can lay claim to the entire Mediterranean world. 44 BC, Cleopatra is just 25 years old. In the aftermath of Caesar's death, Rome is in chaos. Without Roman support, Cleopatra must now try to make the throne secure for herself and her son. To broadcast her propaganda, the queen uses the medium of the ancient pharaohs, massive monuments. At the Dendera Temple in southern Egypt, in a vast engraving, she makes one of her boldest statements to the Egyptian people. Cleopatra is shown worshipping the gods of the temple, with her son Caesarion depicted as a grown-up pharaoh. Facing them is the son of Isis, Horus, and then the goddess herself. Like Cleopatra, Isis had a mate, Osiris, who had been hacked to death, and a child, Horus. The wall relief spells out, like a giant billboard, that Cleopatra and her son are just like Isis and her son.
So it is a dynastic statement, and just as the Horus child, who is the son of Isis, is the legitimate successor of his deceased father Osiris on a religious plane, so too Caesarion should be the person who should succeed Julius Caesar.
In Rome, two men have seized power. Octavian, Caesar's 19-year-old grandnephew and heir, and Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted aide. Antony and Octavian split the empire between them. Octavian takes Western Europe. Antony takes the rich eastern provinces near Egypt. Antony departs immediately to raise money for his troops in his new domain. A robust, pleasure-loving man, Antony is said to bear the bold and masculine look of the hero god Hercules. Married for the third time, he is a brilliant cavalry officer and an able speaker and politician. But unlike his mentor, Julius Caesar, his quick mind lacks discipline.
Caesar seems to be a man of great self-control, who knew precisely what he was doing at all times. Antony, on the other hand, was known for his self-indulgence, his drunkenness, his irresistibility to women, and his inability to resist women. So he was, in many ways, Caesar's antithesis.
His soldiers loved him as long as he was successful, because he was hail fellow, well met with them, drank with them, ate with them. But he did not have, I think, 1/10 of the intellectual force and attraction of character that Caesar had had.
As he travels through his new domains, crowds hail Mark Antony as the new Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and immortality. In 41 BC, Cleopatra receives an intriguing letter. Antony is seeking Egyptian support for his invasion of Parthia in present-day Iran. For weeks, Cleopatra keeps him waiting. Finally, she agrees to meet him at Tarsus, in what is now southeast Turkey. Cleopatra stages her arrival as a dazzling theatrical spectacle, traveling in a royal barge with a golden stern and billowing purple sails. She reclines under a golden canopy, dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love. She entertains Antony at a magnificent banquet that goes on for 4 days. Once again, a mighty Roman commander falls for her charms. It is a legendary romance. but firmly grounded in political realities.
They needed each other politically and economically. Cleopatra, by this time, was ruling Egypt efficiently enough that she had funds, which Antony desperately needed. And he came to her looking for money to pay his troops, for timber to build his ships, for a political partnership with one of the most important monarchs in the region that he now wished to establish himself as overlord. So when they met, they had a mixture of sort of pragmatic motives.
Cleopatra has an ambitious agenda of her own. She hopes Antony can replace Caesar as her new ally. Through the grand theater she stages at Tarsus, Cleopatra makes her aspirations known.
We have to understand that these are, this is ceremony, this is pomp, this is circumstance. Everything is being couched in ritual which has meaning, and that meaning is very, very easily understood.
Cleopatra portrays her alliance with Antony as the union of two popular gods, Aphrodite and Dionysus. It is her way of inviting Antony to join with her and rule the Mediterranean world. Antony joins Cleopatra in Alexandria. The queen arranges an endless round of parties and diversions, but she never forgets her larger purpose.
And there's a story that Plutarch tells about Antony going out fishing, and Cleopatra somehow arranged for a dried fish to be hung on his hook. And when he pulled it in, she was there beside him, and she turned to him, teasing him, and said, "You shouldn't be fishing for this trash. You should be fishing for kingdoms and empires."
But soon, power struggles at home force Antony to leave Egypt and return to Rome. After he leaves, Cleopatra gives birth to Antony's twins. Antony's wife dies, but instead of returning to Cleopatra, he marries Octavian's sister, a political marriage of convenience. Once again, it seems Cleopatra has lost her hold on Rome. For the next 3 years, she devotes herself to governing Egypt. She is a capable and popular ruler. But regaining the wider empire of her ancestors seems to lie beyond her grasp. In the autumn of 37 BC, Antony is in Syria, preparing to invade Parthia. He summons Cleopatra. They spend the winter in passionate reunion. But as always, the lovers have powerful political motives. Cleopatra was raised on the sagas of her ancestors' glory. Partnership with Antony holds out even greater promise, a revival of Alexander the Great's united empire of the East and West. Cleopatra will provide money, ships, and men. In return, she drives a hard bargain. She demands and gets from Antony vast territories that have been under Roman control. In one stroke, Cleopatra has reclaimed nearly all of her ancestors' domains. Antony invades Parthia with an enormous army. The campaign is a disaster. By the time he retreats to Syria, he has lost nearly half of his men. Has Cleopatra picked the wrong man as her ally?
He was probably the only candidate around who might have been able to help her realize her goal. And if you look at the power politics of the late Roman and early imperial aspect of Rome, Antony was a big player earlier on. He certainly, on paper, could have brought to the table what she needed to be able to realize this dream. But I don't think he had the character to be able to bring it about.
She had to make the best she could of him, and she made the best she could of him, and it wasn't enough.
In the months to come, Antony does manage to conquer Armenia. Back in Egypt, he stages a spectacular ceremony that comes to be known as the Donations of Alexandria. Dressed as Dionysus, with Cleopatra as Isis, Antony grants vast realms to his children, even lands he has not yet conquered. Rome is not amused.
Why the Romans were so outraged by the Donations of Alexandria was because in this still piece of theatre, or enormous, grand piece of theatre, it was made very plain that what Antony was doing was no longer attempting to conquer dominions for Rome. He was attempting to build an empire for himself, with Cleopatra as his partner.
Antony makes an official proclamation that Caesarion is Caesar's son, his legitimate son, an outright challenge to Octavian, his rival. The empire Antony and Cleopatra are planning obviously includes Rome itself. An official Roman coin is issued by Antony with his own likeness on one side and a radical new image of Cleopatra on the other. Her youthful profile is replaced by an elderly face with severe, almost masculine features. A portrait meant to conform with Roman notions of a virtuous matron. Octavian strikes back. He launches a bitter propaganda war against Cleopatra. His depiction of her has survived for 2,000 years. Debauched, dangerous, promiscuous. The harlot queen wears herself out fornicating with her servants. It is said any man who refuses to sleep with her faces execution.
It's extraordinary how persistent Octavian's propaganda has been. I mean, you look at all these movies that have been made, she is the Oriental vamp. And that's the one thing that Octavian plugged again and again. This was outlandish, Oriental stuff, weird religions, and insatiable and indiscriminate sex. I don't think so. There is no solid evidence for her having had any sexual connections at all, except first with Caesar and then with Antony.
And the Roman texts don't say, oh, while you were going out with Antony, you were sleeping with Tom, Dick, and Harry. They simply call her trollop and harlot. But they never actually prove that.
To Octavian, Antony has become a man bewitched by love. Cleopatra has turned a great Roman military man into a weak-willed slave.
The Romans saw the Egyptians as being pathetically decadent for various reasons, but the main one was that they allowed themselves to be ruled by a woman. In the sort of Roman sources, you find a real horror of what happens to a man if he allows a woman to have any kind of influence over him whatsoever. And of course, again, that overlaps with the kind of sexual fear and a horror of the kind of sexual allure that women can exert.
Octavian persuades the Senate to formally strip Antony of all of his powers. Then he declares war, not against Antony, but against the Egyptian queen. To survive, Cleopatra knows she must now conquer Rome itself. Greece is chosen as the battlefield. Antony and Cleopatra gather the largest fleet the world has seen since Alexander the Great. 500 warships, more than 75,000 men. Octavian's Roman force is smaller, but on his side is the brilliant naval commander, Agrippa. With stealth and surprise, Agrippa quickly traps Antony and Cleopatra's forces at the Bay of Actium. For 4 months, the blockade drags on. To escape, Antony's officers favor a land battle, but Cleopatra will not abandon her ships. On September the 2nd, 31 BC, her fleet moves out to meet the Roman navy. The Battle of Actium is a fiasco. Cleopatra's squadron of 60 ships slips through the Roman lines and escapes with the treasury of Egypt intact. Antony quickly follows, leaving his fleet behind to be crushed by Octavian's forces. The Romans boast that Cleopatra fled in womanly cowardice, and lovesick Antony chased after her. But modern analysis suggests the retreat from battle was prearranged.
And Antony followed her because he needed to break out, and he intended that the entire fleet should follow him. In fact, for reasons which have been greatly disputed to do with wind and weather, the fleet failed to follow. So what happened at Actium was bad luck, but it wasn't the result of womanly cowardice.
Aboard Cleopatra's flagship, Antony sits alone for 3 days, unable to speak. The treasury they have saved is rich enough to build another navy, but they soon learn their forces everywhere are defecting to Octavian. Disheartened, they return to Alexandria. Cleopatra's dreams of a new world order are smashed. She knows Octavian will soon hunt them down. Bravely, she organizes feasts and persuades Antony to join her. Their friends call themselves those who are going to die together. Cleopatra prepares for the ordeal to come. In the spring of 30 BC, Cleopatra learns that Octavian is on his way with his armies. She offers to abdicate if her children can rule in her place. Mark Antony offers his life to save Cleopatra's. Octavian ignores their pleas. Initially, Antony's forces defeat Octavian's advanced cavalry. But that night, the eerie sound of instruments and singing is heard, as if a troop of revelers were leaving the city. The people say Antony's god Dionysus is abandoning him. The next day, hearing a rumor that Cleopatra is dead, Antony stabs himself. He is brought to Cleopatra and dies in her arms. Capture by Octavian is a fate Cleopatra cannot bear. She chooses history's most famous suicide. In her last message, she asks Octavian to bury her at Antony's side.
And so, unlike most people who would maybe compromise their principles, Cleopatra says, well, I tried to do it and I can't, so she commits suicide, realizing that because she cannot get, that goal is unattainable, life may not be worth living.
In death, Cleopatra is dressed in the robes of Isis and wears the crown of divine monarchy. It is not known how she died, but legend has her succumbing to the venom of a cobra, smuggled in a basket of figs. 2 faint puncture marks are found on her arm. It is the most fitting death for the Queen of Egypt. The cobra is a sacred animal, companion of Isis and protector of the pharaohs. Its bite is thought to confer immortality. In the last of her great spectacles, Cleopatra proclaims her destiny as a goddess. After Cleopatra's death, Octavian immediately has her son Caesarion killed, but her 3 children by Antony are spared. Octavian takes over Egypt as a province of the Roman Empire. He rules for another 45 years, the emperor of Rome when Christ is born. An age is over. At its beginning looms Alexander the Great. At its end, the last queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. They shared the dream of a glorious empire of the East and West. And the radiance of the dreamers lives on. For 2,000 years, the Western world remembered the Roman story of Cleopatra, the wicked temptress, the lover of Caesar and Antony. But we are learning of the very different version that prevailed in Egypt. There, for hundreds of years after her death, Cleopatra was revered as a heroic and brilliant patriot.
A queen who reconstructed her country, a working queen, and a queen who kept Rome at bay for 20 years.
By the end of Cleopatra's reign, she had ruled so efficiently that her treasure was enough to cause interest rates in Rome to fall by over 2/3 when the treasure was brought back to Rome.
And what makes the character of Cleopatra so wonderful is she's not behaving like a man or a woman, but she's behaving, in my view, the way a very, very morally driven, purposeful individual would.
She had all the qualities of a ruler, period, man or woman.
700 years after her death, an Egyptian holy man calls her the most illustrious and wise among women. It is the kind of immortality Cleopatra herself might have chosen. The eternal destiny of the real Cleopatra.
In 2003, Sébastien Foucan led a small group of French freerunners on an extraordinary journey across the rooftops of London's most famous landmarks. Since then, the interest in the extreme sport of parkour, or freerunning, has exploded. This year, he's coming back to London to begin a new journey across some of the UK's biggest and most iconic locations. But this time, he'll be joined along the journey by some of the British newcomers to the sport. Together, they'll jump Britain. When parkour came to the attention of a worldwide audience, few believed it was anything more than a spectacle of men jumping from rooftop to rooftop. But the appeal of parkour was underestimated, and a movement dedicated to movement has been born in the UK.
When everyone's going down a turnstile or down some stairs, there's always the one person that's going that little bit faster, that little bit more efficient. There's people who are taking the inside route through a turning because they're trying to get to their meeting faster, or these little routes and turns. We've just elaborated on this with a bit more confidence, a bit more enthusiasm, a bit more imagination.
Central to this new sport is a philosophy that changes the way the freerunners view their towns and cities. Obstacles become a kind of urban furniture, springboards to launch off, leap from, or land on.
Everyone has their own way of moving, and some people are very fluid and elegant, while others are more explosive and dynamic. Everyone thinks differently when it comes to parkour. The different freerunners will use different techniques. They'll create different ways of moving to overcome just a simple box. You can create so much with just a rail. It's incredible.
To see people doing this without any skates on, without being on a bike, and just using their own body, it's just inspiring.
The internet was the most important thing in the whole growth of parkour. Anyone can get hold of a camera and put a 5-minute video on the internet, and that's how it grows.
At first, parkour wasn't easy to find on the internet, not least because no one was sure how to spell it. It was only a matter of time before a UK website was created.
It kind of spread outside of France very quickly throughout one year, about 2003, and Urban Free Flow was the first place for people to discuss parkour, basically.
The creation of Urban Free Flow was led by a former boxer and recent convert to the new French discipline.
I finished boxing at the age of 26 because I got married and had a kid. And I decided to get into martial arts to kind of fill a void. And I never really felt that that void was really, filled. And then I found parkour, and then it was. I found a couple of guys based in London that were doing it. We arranged to meet, and I decided to kind of try it out to see how I'd get on. And I found myself really, really enjoying it. And Urban Free Flow was pretty much born 2 days later. And the site, since February the 10th, 2003, has had over 5 million hits.
As the British scene began to organise itself, like France, teams of freerunners formed all over the country.
I got an email from Easy, and he was thinking of starting a parkour day in England where English people could train and share tips. He said, "I'd like you to come along and meet us." And I was really scared because my parents had convinced me that he'd be like a paedophile. They were like, "Don't meet people on the internet because, you could end up getting raped." And I didn't really know what Easy would look like. And when I saw this massive, big, bald guy, he had a really stunned face, I was like, no way. But then behind him was Acid, and Acid had this adrenaline-packed grin, like he'd been doing the most awesome thing all day. And I was like, yeah, this is the future.
Kirby was raised in Surrey, in a post-war urban landscape not dissimilar to the French birthplace of parkour.
I moved here when I was 7 and we started roller skating everywhere, but the council pebbled everything over to stop us from skating. So we started playing in the parks. We'd get asked to leave the parks because we were too old. So we started climbing on everything, and that kind of encouraged us to find new ways to move. Then I remember seeing a video on the internet of Sebastian and his friends, and it was like something we'd been waiting for, something that'd given us the green light to say, go, there's something that can be done with this.
But for Kirby, free running would prove to be more than just a physical release.
When I was about 14, 15, I had what I thought was depression. I'd been to the doctors, been to see counsellors, and you know, they couldn't really work out why I had depression. There were times when I'd been really, really upset, and then I'd find myself going out and doing parkour and forgetting who I am and forgetting every one of my problems. Becoming Kirby, I guess. Not being John anymore, not having the weight on my shoulders that John has, but being Kirby, just practicing my free run, putting videos on the internet. People know my name, people know who I am. It's given me the best group of friends I could ever hope for.
In preparation for the challenge ahead, Kirby and another member of his team are making a pilgrimage to Paris to see the suburb where free running was born and to train with Sébastien Foucan on his home turf.
I don't know what to expect really. It's got a lot of hype around it about the things you can do, the things that are actually there. So I'm hoping it is as good as everyone says it is. And I don't want to be disappointed when I get there, you know?
Sebastian, I think I would see him as the head ambassador of parkour. He's thought very deeply about the philosophy and the intellectual side of parkour.
His parkour's on another level, and that's because he's trained really, really hard. You know, he's put the time in, and he'll say himself, "There's no secret behind parkour. It's about practice, 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 and it's just getting out there and doing it."
Lisse is the mecca of parkour, without a doubt. So all the locals have picked up the parkour skills as well, and they just practice it casually on the street. All these kids all over the place. Its architecture as well lends itself really well to learning parkour, and I can see how it sprung up there.
When we were a child here.
Yeah, I was going to jump London.
Yeah. This is here. We have a lot of things.
It's got to be done.
For practicing.
Sebastian is very important in parkour. He's kind of opened all of our eyes up to what free running really is, the art of movement and how it's supposed to be done. It's not about the big, spectacular jumps that you see. It's all about the small footwork, the foot placement, the hand placements. It's about the way you move.
Here, it's a famous place too. Here, yes. At the beginning, it was just this. For example, this is the first jump, and after I'm here from there.
Really? You can do that?
Yeah.
Oh. That is very good.
But I have a lot of things to show you over there.
Okay. Yeah. Getting up that roof. How did you? That wall is massive to get up.
Oh yes, over there I can to show you.
Do you guys still meet up here ever?
Still meet up together?
Together to train.
Yeah. But practicing it always the best practicing it when you are alone. But
you think
you have a lot of things. Yeah. Okay. Because you need to be focused on yourself. You can do a jump with a friend, you know. It's okay, but when you're alone, it's different. You're a little bit afraid. Yeah. And you need to find why, and you need to find the solution, and etc. This is good. Yeah. This is Dame de Lac.
Dame de Lac.
Oh. This is Dame de Lac. Here.
My God. This is nuts.
All right, here. Everywhere.
That must be so scary. This is mad. I can't believe it.
it's amazing, you know. I mean, they find some way, they run. We don't know where, but he know, you know.
It's what I thought it'd be and more. And it made me realise how good these guys actually are and the status they have, why they're up there. Because the stuff that they do is so far beyond what, you know, we can do and things. So it's been an experience.
No?
I have so much respect for him, and he'll always do something each time that makes me respect him that little bit more. Because he'll do a massive jump and he won't turn around and go like, yeah, look what I've done. He just smiles and says, your turn, you can do it.
That's it.
Sebastian, Kirby and Blue, along with Jerome Ben Auers, another of the elite French freerunners, are ready to return to London. Ahead of them lies a new challenge, a parkour journey that will cover all four corners of the nation and some of the UK's most famous and iconic landmarks. Easy, Bam and many of the British freerunners will join along the way, giving them and us a view of Britain as it's never been seen before. The signature moves of parkour may be high-level, roof-to-roof spectacular jumps, but the fundamentals are learnt at ground level. Urban Free Flow hold regular PK days, where they can both practice their moves and pass on their expertise to new freerunners.
Let's go. When we first started, it took us maybe a year or two to get hold of the basic techniques. Someone can come here in a gym day and learn them all in one day because everyone can help them.
As part of his own training, Sebastian is taking the opportunity to practice parkour with the British.
Hi. Good? Hi. How's it going?
Okay.
Okay, I'll first demonstrate a monkey vault to a roll, which we will follow, and then work on variations.
You start off with vaults because they're pretty much the simplest. The roll is to spread the shock. I mean, when you're jumping from quite a height, you're landing really hard, so when you do fall, you've got to spread it out. People find it hard because they're scared of clipping their feet, and you do see it quite a bit. People, they kind of underestimate it, but once you get over that kind of fear, you can get your feet up to the proper height, and it's really easy after that.
You want to be jumping and trying to stop as steady as you can.
This move that Bam's teaching is called precision or accuracy jump. Is basically taking off of a point and landing on a precise point, either a rail, a beam, a wall. But it's accuracy. You have to commit 100% and land perfect.
So this height is kind of forcing you to get down. It should be better. That was nice. That was really good. The thing about this balancing thing and precisions, a lot of people, I think, find them quite boring, but once you get really good balance, it just spreads to the rest of everything you do. At the moment, my favourite thing is just balancing on rails and precisioning.
Okay, basic cat leaps. Okay, we're going to do a stationary 240 takeoff here. Have your hands focused on where you're going to land, on the bar, but your feet kind of engage first, and you kind of come into a sitting down position. Okay.
Principles learnt in this environment could save lives at height.
The surface you land on makes cat leap really difficult. There's been times where I've landed on a wall and then bricks have fallen off that I've landed on, and then I've had to move out the way so they don't fall on me. Times when I've landed on moss and algae and slipped. So it's really important to check what you're landing on first. These are mistakes that I'd learned very, very quickly when I first started parkour.
Nice.
This is the dash vault, putting your feet first, and it was actually invented, we first saw it in this gym. It's good for getting over low things, because you have to basically jump over the whole thing and go over it in sort of sitting position. And if it's just a railing, you've got to trust your peripheral vision and kind of hope that you get it there, otherwise you end up sitting on the floor.
Obviously, there's a lot of stuff you can do in here which you can't do outside. Obviously, but it's all padded everywhere. You've got a sprung floor as well. This is just to practice things you've always wanted to try.
And more important than anything here at the moment is about being confident in yourself and free in your mind, you know, really letting go. And that's the one thing you learn in the gym, is letting go.
One of the new moves the British freerunners have been thinking about has never been tried before and is too dangerous to risk anywhere but in the gym. A combination that begins as a flip and ends like a cat leap. While the UK contingent is confident, Sebastian feels differently.
Maybe you can try.
No.
Why?
I think it's not. It's impossible.
Although difficult, the new move is clearly not impossible, and inevitably the time comes for Sebastian to step up. England 2, France 0.
This is parkour in England.
Oh my God!
You want to come train sometime?
Representing. Oh.
Now your legs are too bent. Start again.
See, I told you, man. I told you. Now look. This is why the repetition is very important.
Preparations are well underway for this year's challenge, taking parkour to new heights, on top of and across some of the UK's best-known landmarks and locations. Sebastian and Jerome will begin the journey, and along the way will be joined by Easy, Bam, Kirby, and many others. The work begins where it all started. The British freerunners are out on the streets of London. The production stunt coordinator is keen to gauge the level of their abilities.
What I'm trying to find out today really is to look at them and their individual styles. Although they're all doing parkour, free running, they all have their own little way of actually assessing the jumps, the leaps. I mean, it's very impressive. They're all to very high standards. You know, they're athletes in their own right. We can't have bravado on the day. I don't want to see anybody going for anything just because the camera's there and more experienced people are there. They've got nothing to prove to each other.
As with Jump London, difficult negotiations are taking place to gain access to potential locations all over the country. But the landmarks being suggested are of a very different size and scale than anywhere that has ever been looked at for parkour before.
This is one of possibilities.
But is one of the possibilities walking or running or no?
I don't walk. I'm like this, like a cat. You know.
The fourth rail bridge is
just one of my favourite places. It's a beautiful structure. It's also extraordinarily dangerous. 57 people were killed when they built it. Now, the people who work there every day are extremely safety conscious. That's okay for them, but we're bringing Sebastian and a film crew up there. We're 400 feet above the sea. The consequences of us not getting it right are terrible. It's a big bridge, and it was never designed to have people clambering all over it.
Other sites being considered present a different problem. Heritage sites that are hundreds of years old and built using ancient and slippery materials with irregular surfaces. As he tours the country, Sebastian takes the opportunity to meet new freerunners and offer encouragement and advice.
Yeah, try, slowly, just slowly. Yeah.
It's really inspiring. Yeah.
He's always very willing to teach people anything. It's really nice.
Yeah, that is pretty refreshing actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
get a lot of guys who can do that kind of stuff just to say, yeah, look at me, and it's like, yeah.
And his muscles are always bigger in real life, I find.
Yes, dear.
Not all of the locations being considered are historically iconic or ancient, but involve jumping and landing on a very unusual set of materials.
I stay here just.
He's proposing to do a jump from this steel structure, which has got a sheer drop on the far side, right back down to ground level, which I don't know, is probably got to be about 150 or more feet. Jump from here onto this glass tower, and then jump onto the other steel structure on the far side.
Sebastian! No, it's good, okay.
Birmingham's relatively new International Convention Centre offers a different setting. Acres of high-level terraced rooftops, walls, and leaps galore. Parkour heaven.
It's got lots of opportunity. A precision jump, a cat leap back the other way, 180 cat, various opportunities to jump off the roof. It's looking good.
This is better than concrete. Yeah, absolutely.
Roll.
Soon, Sebastian, Jerome and the British freerunners will be pushing their parkour skills to the limit. New heights and environments that were never imagined for freerunning, and materials, both ancient and modern, that are difficult enough to walk on, let alone jump from or land on. It's a unique celebration of some of the landscapes and structures that have shaped the UK. There are 9 locations.
5.3 meters. Beautiful bomb. C'est grand. Non, non, non piqué.
seen things. You're a good cat burglar. I was terrified. I've never seen anything like it in my life. Never. Absolutely fantastic.
Sebastian and the followers of parkour have successfully taken freerunning to new heights and extremes across the UK. Perhaps it's only this generation that could have embraced such a mix of physicality and philosophy. These are skills that look like they belong to the world of fantasy, films like The Matrix, or the impossible moves of video games. As life imitates art, so life informs art. The company that brought Lara Croft into the world is developing a free-running game. Casting the role of their new on-screen heroes was not difficult.
She's the basic skeleton we have for the character. So what you have is that skeleton and then a polygon mesh. We then texture the character, quite like the counterpart, and then we can start getting him to move around.
Here is a display of Easy, Bam and Sebastian, which is the latest versions of the characters at the moment. Obvious is the kind of height or lack of height difference in the virtual versions compared to real life. But that's something we've got to do because of the kind of nature of the game, and the whole control system means that we really need characters that are about the same height, so that when you're doing moves you're able to interact with the environment in the same way, and it's not actually dependent on your height.
You look really mean.
You do look very mean in the game.
Really, I am mean.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
Looks mean anyway.
Before he heads home to France, it's Sebastian's turn to make a suburban journey. This time, he's travelled to Surrey to see Kirby on his home estate.
I didn't think that was possible.
Okay, it's possible.
Killed my playground. When I first started parkour, I thought this area was very bad. I couldn't think of anything to do.
Yeah.
Now I do parkour, I appreciate this area because I always find something new.
Yeah.
I mean, this I hadn't even considered from here to here.
Yeah.
Until one day I came over here, landed here, and I thought maybe I could do that.
Yeah.
Run. I mean, and now it's just very, very easy to do.
I don't like to teach too much. You can find the way by yourself, naturally, like when you learn to walk, you know, and you just need to have a guide to say you be careful, to say you don't do this for impress some people. Just follow your way, follow your instinct.
It's defeated me in a parkour battle. Once you do it, you see the world differently, and then once you see the world like that, you can't stop seeing it like that. So everyone will be joining in. One day, everyone who is able to do parkour will be doing parkour. At least once, everyone will give it a try.
Oh, that was a down cat. Okay, no work. This is it. Oh, I hurt myself. Ow. This is rather strange. So you might want to press square and drop in there. Whoa, that's extreme close up there.
It still hasn't sunk in, and I don't think it will.
I'm still not quite sure if it's real.
I think it will get to the point where you'll be in your room or something, and you'll look out the window, and you'll see a person there jumping off something. You see a person over there, and it will catch on like that because it's so easy to do. I mean, when you talk about people roller skating and stuff, they say, "Oh, that's really hard. That is. I'll never do that. I'll never do that." What's so hard about this? You put on some trainers, walk out your door. They will jump. You know, you're free running. Stand on a little wall, jump off that, you're free running. How hard can it be? So it's going to catch on. It's going to be amazing.
In a very short space of time, parkour has found its feet. From the outskirts of Paris, via the rooftops of London, to the far corners of the UK. This is a discipline that's appeal is growing by the day. But it doesn't stop there. It seems parkour is going global.
City Parkour Boys!
I'm Liam from Switzerland.
Salon.
We're from New York City. We are the concept of Dash from Jyväskylä, Finland.
Hi, I'm Eshte from Pagosi, Gabon.
This is Parkour Japan.
Our lives are filled with joy and sorrow, challenge and change, with growing up and growing old, the seasons of life. But through it all, the central question on the minds of most people is, does it end here? Is this the inevitable conclusion to life's journey? Or is there something beyond this life, a spiritual realm, that place the Bible describes as heaven, where we'll continue to live forever? The questions are as old as humanity and as new as the latest scientific research. What about this place called heaven? A place where pain and suffering no longer exists? A place where we live with God Himself for eternity? Of course, our evidence for heaven must begin with the question of life beyond death. And while some may doubt that possibility, to others, it's not a question at all.
In an automobile accident in 1975, my spirit left my body in the emergency room. I experienced the warmth and the presence of God and the peace while I saw my body racked in pain on the emergency room table. Yes, I believe in the afterlife. I know it exists. I've experienced it.
Where did we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going? As Christians, we believe the answers to those questions are found in the Bible, and we accept those answers on faith alone. But what about those who are not willing to begin their journey by faith? Those that are looking for what they consider more substantial evidence. With that in mind, it's not surprising then the level to which modern science has raised the search for heaven. Could it be they're responding to the insatiable need to know more about what life's about and what lies beyond it? Current studies reveal that the vast majority of people the world over profess a belief in life after death and in a place called heaven. Many of us believe in heaven and have at least an idea of what it's like. But for all of us, there are some unanswered questions. This search for heaven will bring us face to face with research experts, Bible scholars and scientists who've been searching for the evidence that will provide critical answers, perhaps answers to some of your questions or questions others have asked you. Certainly, we believe that our destiny is heaven, but what are the biblical signposts that will guide us on the path of discovery? Are there spiritual proofs that can be tested objectively? If we find the borders of heaven, do we also discover the gates of hell? Your host for this special presentation is Jerry Rose, the president of a national cable and television broadcast group and the host of a daily television show. He's an ordained minister and has served for 3 terms as the president of the National Religious Broadcasters. And now, here's Jerry Rose.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. These first words of the Bible establish God as the eternal creator of all things, including heaven and earth. And from that beginning, right through to the book of Revelation, there are many references to heaven. Deuteronomy tells us heaven, even the highest heaven, belongs to God. And it was from heaven that God's voice was heard at the baptism of Jesus. Elijah went up in a whirlwind to heaven. And Isaiah implores us, lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Paul tells us he was caught up to heaven. And the book of Revelation promises there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and the dwelling of God will be with men. These and dozens of other scriptural references give us assurances that heaven is a real place.
The book of Hebrews, chapter 8 and 9, teach that heaven is more real than earth itself. And it is important that we understand the realness of heaven and set our eyes on a real place where we are really going to spend eternity.
Heaven is a spiritual realm, and its existence requires faith. We're told in the Bible that without faith we cannot please God, because we must come to Him by faith. Could it be that finally, after 6,000 years, evidence is emerging that could prove that heaven exists? mighty cathedrals with lofty spires and humble village chapels have all been built with the hope of heaven as part of the architect's plan. But from the most humble bricklayer to the most powerful king, this magnificent outpouring has its foundation in faith. Could it be that we're at the very beginning of a whole new era of knowledge and understanding? Is evidence now emerging compelling enough to convince the skeptics, even scientists? With recent advances in medical technique, more and more people are coming back from the edge of death. These medical miracles have given rise to a new phenomenon known as the near-death experience. People who apparently slip from the doctor's grasp but come back to life, so to speak, and bring with them remarkably vivid and unexplainable visions. Visions that appear to be associated with all of the beliefs we normally associate with heaven. Dr. Kenneth Ring, Professor Emeritus of Psychology at the University of Connecticut, has worked with a number of these people.
In many near-death experiences, people talk about a feeling of tremendous peace and well-being. They often say that they find themselves out of their physical body and are able to see it as though a spectator to it from an elevated position. Many people describe traveling through a dark space, sometimes talked about like a tunnel, and then they find themselves in the presence of a beautiful radiating light of astonishing beauty, and where a feeling of love and great tenderness comes in. Some of these people also talk about having a life review in which they see virtually everything that's happened in their life, and then they may make a decision to go back to their body, or they may be told that they have to go back, that their work here isn't finished. Those are some of the typical features of a near-death experience.
But there are other aspects of the near-death experience that appear to go beyond the memory of the event and actually center on the immediate things going on around them. In many of these instances, the evidence is very compelling. Let's begin with a recent event that took place at the Hartford Hospital.
Cardiac arrest. Unknown.
Let's go, come on. Okay, pulse. Start CPR. Ready to birth. Clear. Flap, resume CPR.
In spite of heroic efforts, eventually even the best physicians are forced to just give up. But in this particular instance, the patient apparently didn't. According to all medical and physical science, what happened in this particular emergency room was, well, impossible.
What?
I saw the most amazing thing. I left my body.
The woman told the doctor she had left her body entirely while those in the room had been working to revive her. She felt herself being pulled up through several floors of the hospital until she found herself on the roof. She was enjoying the view of the skyline when she noticed something red out of the corner of her eye. It was, she said, a shoe. Obviously, everyone was extremely skeptical. After all, hadn't she been completely comatose? But when Dr. Raymond Moody, author of Life After Life, heard about it, he was more inclined to accept the woman's story. Dr. Moody has researched hundreds of these kinds of events.
The near-death experience is a powerful statement of the reality of the afterlife. As resuscitation techniques improve, more and more people are having profoundly meaningful experiences when they return from the verge of death. They tell us that they find themselves out of their bodies and yet still functioning and alive. As a medical doctor, I began my clinical investigations of these experiences somewhat dubious, and then quickly realized that we can only ignore the evidence for so long.
Inevitably, one of those present insisted on proving the woman's story. It seemed simple enough, just have someone go to the roof and check.
Eventually, the reality of what's happening begins to set in, and you become aware that the only way of accounting for the decisive commonalities in these experiences is to assume their validity.
That's the shoe. That's the red shoe.
Under any circumstance, it seems highly unlikely that a woman brought in on the ground floor in a coma could have had any knowledge of a red shoe on a roof. But it takes more than anecdotal evidence, even this convincing, to achieve scientific credibility. What was needed was some scientific way to demonstrate that the body and the spirit can exist separately. That discovery would provide strong evidence for life after death. But how could that be done? Sometimes answers come from unlikely sources. In this case, the unlikely source was a woman named Pam Reynolds. A stunning array of scientific instruments and measurements were in place at the very moment of Pam Reynolds' death. The results were astonishing. At age 35, Pam was diagnosed with a life-threatening brain aneurysm. Her only hope was a very unusual operation. In order to fix the problem and to save her life, doctors would have to drain the blood out of Pam Reynolds' head. What's more, her body temperature would be lowered to 60 degrees. Her heartbeat and breathing would stop completely, and her brain waves would be flattened. Doctors who perform this intense procedure have nicknamed it standstill, because for all intents and purposes, Pam Reynolds would be dead. But what happened was so thoroughly unique and unexpected, Dr. Michael Sabin, a cardiologist and the author of Light and Death, made an extensive evaluation of the Pam Reynolds experience.
The process of death, scientifically, now is known to be a process and not a point in time. It starts with normal waking reality and ends up in irreversible death. During this process, the body dies at different rates. The problem we have as scientists and physicians is to determine when the brain is actually dead, i.e. when the person is actually dead.
In the case of Pam Reynolds, one of the surgeon's main concerns was seizure activity, which could prove deadly during such a delicate procedure. To guard against this and other complications, Pam's brain and body were extensively instrumented and monitored, which makes what happened next even more intriguing. Pam told the doctor she left her body and became a spectator to what they were doing to her body. Later, she was able to describe people, procedures, and even medical instruments she could not possibly have seen.
Pam Reynolds had a very deep near-death experience at the time that she had documented no brainwave activity, no brainstem activity, and actually the blood had been physically drained from her head at the time. So this eliminates the possibility that this was a seizure phenomenon, because during her experience she had no seizure activity on the EEG. In addition, she had plugs in both of her ears, and so she could not have physically heard what was being discussed in the operating room during the surgical procedure, and she could recall the accurate discussions that were going on between the surgeons at the time that she was having her experience.
Remember, every bodily reflex was being monitored. She was in a profoundly inactive state. But Pam Reynolds somehow was able to describe a particular surgical tool in amazing detail. A tool which she would later say looked like an electric toothbrush with a dent in it. She even noticed that the tool had interchangeable blades and that these were kept in something that she said looked like a socket wrench case. How could Pam Reynolds have described with such amazing accuracy the details of what took place in the operating room when she was, according to all monitoring devices, dead? Dr. J.P. Moreland, professor of philosophy at Bible University, finds this kind of experience compelling.
The most provocative evidence for heaven from near-death experiences seems to me to be cases where people come back from near-death experiences and they have information there's no way they could have had if they had just had a physical experience while on an operating table. For example, some people come back and they're able to recount conversations that their relatives have had 5 blocks away from the hospital. In other occasions, people have actually had experiences of objects on the hospital roof or somewhere else, where when people go to investigate whether those experiences were real, they see the objects just as the people saw them. In other occasions, people have met dead relatives that died about the same time the person died in the near-death experience. And they came back and reported the death of a relative that no one there in the operating room knew about. Now, this provides pretty strong evidence that something more is going on than just a lack of oxygen to the brain.
The Pam Reynolds experience would seem to add one more bit of evidence that the spirit lives on when the body dies. But lives on where? Where does that spirit go? Are we any closer to identifying the place those spirits might reside? Perhaps we're getting closer to heaven. What is it that keeps hundreds of millions of people the world over fascinated by something they've never seen? Are there those who have seen heaven and actually left a record of their experience? Is this notion of a near-death experience, or NDE as it's widely referred to, a purely modern phenomenon, or does it have some historical, even biblical roots? The concept of God in heaven who is active in the affairs of humankind has been an important part of biblical teaching for thousands of years and powerfully portrayed in painting, literature, and song for centuries. Interestingly, although different faiths vary slightly in their concept of heaven, all of them focus on the ideas of peace, serenity, and some sort of justice or retribution. These concepts seem to bridge all societal norms. According to a recent Gallup poll, over 70% of those polled believed in the existence of a heaven of some kind. Strong evidence indeed for the power of ideas. Or could it be the idea of a powerful God? Christianity, for example, has for centuries proclaimed that Jesus Christ died on the cross, was buried, and yet emerged from the tomb alive. This, according to the Christian view, is a matter of historical fact.
The Christian viewpoint of heaven is ultimately communicated through Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, who is God in human flesh, who demonstrated that he was God through the immutable fact of the resurrection. So his opinion is infinitely better than my opinion or anybody else's opinion, because Christ is the creator of the cosmos. Christ said he was the way, the truth, and the life, that only through a relationship with him could we be united with him for all eternity. So only those who put their trust in Jesus Christ ultimately are going to spend an eternity with him.
Many people create their own ideas of the afterlife because they do not wish to accept the biblical account of heaven, because to do so necessitates a belief in hell, and it's easier to create something that is wonderful than something that is possibly degrading or eternally separated from God in heaven.
Traditional Judaism also firmly believes that death is not the end of human existence. But because Judaism is primarily focused on the here and now rather than the afterlife, it leaves a great deal of room for personal opinion. It is possible for an Orthodox Jew to believe that the souls of the righteous go to a place similar to the Christian heaven, or that they simply wait until the coming of the Messiah, when they will be resurrected. And of course, there are those whose belief system excludes any possibility of life beyond the grave. The skeptic finds no comfort in either the nature of the evidence nor the amount of it.
All of the commonly reported manifestations of these so-called near-death experiences can be explained in either psychological terms or in terms of drug-induced or oxygen deprivation-induced hallucinations, if you will. I can understand how someone inclined to believe in an afterlife and in heaven might interpret their experiences that way, whereas someone not oriented to that belief might be perfectly happy with a more normal explanation.
But can these remarkable near-death experiences be explained away simply as psychologically conditioned responses or hallucinations? There are those who disagree.
One of the medical explanations for near-death experiences is called hypoxia. And this has to do with the idea that when you die, your brain is deprived of oxygen. And that explains some of the feelings that you have, such as going through a dark tunnel and then seeing a bright light. However, one thing that doesn't explain is the fact that people who go through a near-death experience can typically recount with great detail what the nurse and what the doctor said, as well as the very specific procedures that they went through in trying to save your life. So however you look at it, hypoxia and other medical explanations can't account for that one fact.
In my research, I have found there to be no evidence that near-death phenomena are caused by either drug-induced hallucinations or psychological manifestations.
Having a doctorate in both philosophy and medicine, I think I'm a lot more attuned to some of the profound questions that these near-death experiences raise for human consciousness. And in short, I think it's oversimplistic to say that these near-death experiences can be accounted for simply as drugs or as anoxia of the brain or by psychological factors.
Once again, the skeptics find themselves at odds with the experts. But if hypoxia and drug-induced hallucinations are the problem, then there's a lot of it going on. A Gallup poll reports that 8 million Americans, approximately 5% of the adult population, have had a near-death experience. And that's just in today's world. Apparently, this out-of-body event has been going on for a long, long time. Plato wrote of it in his dialogues.
We believe, do we not, that death is the separation of the soul from the body, and that the state of being dead is the state in which the body is separated from the soul, and the soul exists alone by itself.
Plato frames the question as a foregone conclusion, and the Bible, written and compiled over hundreds of years, contains many stories that suggest some people have had access to the world beyond. For example, in Acts 7:55 through 56, Stephen has a pre-death vision. Surrounded by his enemies, Stephen cries out,
"I see heaven open, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God."
And in 2 Corinthians 12, Paul describes what many think was his own near-death experience.
"And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body I do not know, was caught up to paradise. He heard inexpressible things, things that man is not permitted to tell."
Could, in this instance, Paul have been telling us that he was actually there, in paradise? And what other evidence is there for such a place?
The greatest evidence of heaven to me is the Word of God. Jesus promised a heaven to us when he said, "In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also." The Bible teaches that heaven is a real place for real people who will spend a real eternity there with the Lord, enjoying all of the pleasures and benefits that have been promised by God himself. Some believe we'll be like Casper the Ghost in heaven, sitting on a cloud playing a harp, but that's not it. A Bible scholar, H.A. Ironside, said, "Life in heaven will not be that unlike life here on earth," close quote. And by that he meant, we will live on an earth that will have dirt and grass and trees and other people. We'll interact with them. But most importantly, we will have eternal life. We'll live forever.
Because these examples are taken from the Bible, they're accepted by believers as proof. But to skeptics, they're merely another example of anecdotal evidence.
Outside of religion, there is no scientific evidence whatsoever of an afterlife or a place where any of us go other than in the ground 6 feet under pushing up daisies. That's the cold hard evidence. It's unfortunate, but if we want to think of ourselves as living beyond, we have to do so through our work or through our children, but not through actual immortality.
In spite of the skeptics, researchers continuing to build a growing body of impressive evidence are far from being discouraged. While the search for heaven undoubtedly brings us face to face with the unknown and often the unexplainable, there are modern events that continue to provide us with strong evidence of the existence of heaven. The fact is, new clues in the search for heaven are being uncovered even in the halls of science.
The most provocative
evidence that comes from near-death experience is the fact that when you're having these experiences, you are doing things you can't do in your normal, everyday, waking bodily life. For example, you can fly, or you can travel instantly from one place to another place. To me, this is indicative of the heavenly realm. The major problem with the medical professions, and in fact science in general today, is that they refute completely anything that is outside of the materialist realm.
Is there any way to reconcile these scientific and anecdotal evidence? In order for a concept to be judged scientific, certain scientific rules must be applied. For example, for a theory to be regarded scientifically credible, it must rest on a firm foundation of knowledge derived from facts and principles determined through scientific disciplines and protocols. The question then is, does the anecdotal evidence of NDEs established by medical experts lend itself to scientific scrutiny? Dr. Moody's large body of work suggests that indeed it does.
I began my research by talking with about 150 people who had been to the brink of death and had experiences. I was able to identify 15 common elements that occur in these experiences, regardless of the sex, age, or medical condition of the patient. First of all, when a person reaches the point of greatest physical distress, they often hear themselves pronounced dead by the attending physician. They hear an uncomfortable noise and feel themselves moving very rapidly through some sort of aperture, like a tunnel. They find themselves outside of their bodies, watching the resuscitation attempts like a spectator. Soon other things begin to happen. Others come to meet them. They say that they glimpse the spirits of relatives and friends who have already passed away. And they find themselves welcomed by a love that's beyond anything they have ever known. At some point, a being of light and love appears and asks them questions and enables them to review a panorama consisting of every event of their lives. And then at a critical point, they are told that they must go back to Earth.
Interestingly, in all cases the person wants to stay, but for various reasons is required or chooses to come back. And all of them, upon their return, report a complete loss of any further fear of death. Could it be that all of these near-death experiences are actually describing heaven? And if they are, does proof of the existence of heaven also prove the existence of its dark alternative, a place called hell? Perhaps there's something to be gained from an examination of the life of the person caught up in this experience. What kind of lasting and significant changes take place in a person's life after such a traumatic event? Or does it just disappear into the forgotten shadows of memory? It's not something most people like to think about, much less talk about. But the existence of heaven, based on the readings of almost any Judeo-Christian writing, virtually guarantees the existence of its opposite domain, the fearful underworld, Hades, the kingdom of the devil, commonly known as hell.
Biblically, there's going to be the physical resurrection of all people, some to eternal life, and some to eternal separation from God, His goodness, and His glory. And it is because that is what they choose. In the Christian belief, we believe in heaven and hell, because without a hell, there would be no choice. God is neither a cosmic rapist who forces His love on people, nor a cosmic puppeteer who forces people to love Him. Rather, God, the very personification of love, grants us choice. So people who have lived a whole lifetime voluntarily distancing themselves from God are not in the end going to be involuntarily dragged into His presence for all eternity. If they were, heaven would not be heaven. Heaven, in fact, would be hell.
The discovery of heaven, then, is certain to confirm the existence of the place Jesus describes in Luke chapter 16. Jesus tells the story of a rich man who died and is sent to hell. He looks up from hell where he is in torment, and he sees Abraham far away. He begs Abraham to have pity on him because he pleads, "I am in agony in this fire." We have heard of NDEs that relate to heaven, but are there those from the dark side? As a matter of fact, there are. Howard Storm had always considered himself to be a free thinker. He was also an avowed atheist. To him, belief in God was absurd. But a trip to Paris in 1985 changed all that.
Honey. Howard?
Storm was diagnosed with a perforation in his small intestines. In a Paris hospital, Howard's condition weakened until, believing he was near death, he said goodbye to his wife and shortly after slipped into unconsciousness.
When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing next to the bed, and I thought, this is impossible, because just moments before I'd been dying. Then I saw Beverly, my wife, sitting in the chair opposite me on the other side of the bed, and I tried to talk to her, but she acted like she couldn't see me or hear me.
Beverly.
No one could see me or hear me.
Go now.
And then I heard voices calling me from outside the room. These people outside the room were saying, hurry up, come with us. We've been waiting for you a long time. You've got to go now. And I thought they'd come to help me. I kept asking them who they were, but they just insisted that they had come for me, they had been waiting for me, and it was time to go with them. So I thought they were to take me to my operation, and I went with them.
We've been waiting. Howard, come with us.
We've been waiting. They started to push and pull at me, yelling and screaming at me, and I fought back as hard as I could. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, thousands. There's no way to tell in that darkness, swarming all over me. The more I fought, the more vicious they became. To my horror, I realized that they were tearing me apart, consuming me. All of them were laughing and taunting me, and the more they hurt me, the better they liked it. As I lay there on the ground in a fetal position, trying to protect myself from their kicks and their taunting, I heard a voice say, pray to God, and I thought, I don't believe in God. How can I pray? And a second time it said, pray to God, and a third time. And it came out all mixed up with the 23rd Psalm and the Pledge of Allegiance and the Lord's Prayer, just little bits of them that I could remember. But the people around me hated any mention of God, and they were screaming at me. And in my desperation, I yelled out into the darkness, Jesus, please save me. And with that, a tiny light appeared in the darkness and became very bright. It was the most brilliant, beautiful light that lifted me up and filled me with ecstasy. And I knew absolutely that this was the Jesus that I'd believed in as a child. He took me out of that horrible place that I now know was hell, and we began to approach heaven. With Jesus and the angels that he called over to us, we went over my life from its beginning to the end, and I was so ashamed of the things that I had done in my life. But the important thing is I knew that God loved me, and Jesus and the angels loved me, in spite of the things that I had done. And eventually they told me that I had to come back into this world, which was almost unbearable to me to be separated from them. But I knew that through their love for me and my love for them, that I would never be separated from God or the heavenly beings or Jesus again.
Incredible as his experience sounds, Howard Storm remains convinced it was real. In fact, that experience brought about a radical change in Howard's life and transformed him from an unbelieving atheist to a committed believer. He credits that single event for causing a complete turnaround in his life.
I think the most important thing about near-death experiences is the way people's lives are changed. It has been studied by scientists that people who've had near-death experiences lose their fear of death. But more importantly, people who have had near-death experiences know that there is a governing love that rules the universe and they want to be a part of it. And their lives are changed for the better to be a part of that love.
Based on Storm's experience, heaven's counterpart, hell, is equally real. But what of those whose experience is not as chilling as Howard Storm's? It's understandable that such a dramatic encounter with hell might change a person's life, but what happens to those who experience something entirely different? one of the more famous near-death experiences, Danny and Brinkley also endured a life-altering encounter. Danny tells of his experience in complete detail in his book, Saved by the Light. But the basic facts are these. Danny was talking to a friend on the phone in the bedroom of his home in Aiken, South Carolina.
Look, I gotta go. No, I just don't like thunderstorms.
Danny had never been comfortable during thunderstorms, and he was anxious to get off the phone and get away from anything electric. Suddenly, there was an explosion in his ear. Danny was jerked out of his shoes and hurled back into the bed, his body shattered almost beyond recognition. Danny remembers leaving his body and watching as his wife Sandy tried to keep him alive with CPR. Once he dropped back into his tortured body, but not for long. Soon he was out again, watching the medical technicians desperately trying to save his life. As the ambulance began to pull away, Danny saw a number of amazing things. But let's have Danny describe the experience in his own words.
There was a sound of chimes as the tunnel spiraled toward me and then around me. Then all of a sudden there was no Sandy crying. There were no paramedics working on me. There was no ambulance radio chatter. There was just me and the tunnel. I looked ahead into the darkness. There was a light up there. I began to move toward it quickly as possible. I was moving without legs at a high rate of speed. Ahead the light became brighter and brighter until it overtook the darkness and it left me standing in a paradise of brilliant light. It was the brightest light I'd ever seen, but it was soothing to my eyes. I looked to my right and could see a silver form appearing like a silhouette through a mist. As it approached, I began to feel a deep sense of love that encompassed all the meanings of that word. It was as though I was seeing a lover, a mother, a best friend, and multiples 1,000-fold. This being engulfed me, and as it did, I began to experience my whole life, feeling and seeing everything that had ever happened to me.
Suddenly, Danny was back at the hospital, looking down at the frantic scene in the emergency room. The ambulance attendants had done their best to try and revive him, but they had given up. And now as he watched, the doctors finally gave up and pulled the sheet over his head, pronounced him dead, and pushed the gurney out into the hallway. The next stop for Danyan was the morgue. Then, perhaps the most frightening part of the whole experience. Suddenly, he was back in his body, under the sheet, looking up at it with tortured eyes. Danny couldn't move or even make a noise, and the orderlies were coming to take him to the morgue. What's more, now that he was back in his body, it seemed like even his thoughts caused him pain. He saw shadows through the sheet and hoped they would notice, because he did the only thing he could do. He blew on the sheet from underneath.
Hey, come here, he's alive. Look. Hey!
The body Danny came back to was horribly damaged. It would be months before he could move his arms or stand, let alone walk. But the experience would bring about a profound change in his life.
One of the most provocative points about the near-death experience is it begins to open up an understanding that there is a life after death. Not only is there a life after death, there is a system by which we leave this world to enter that one. And the more we study that, the greater the opportunity to lift the veil so that we know that there is not only this life, but a life after this one. From my personal experience, I know there's a life after death. Why? I've had 3 of these experiences, 1 death experience and 2 near-death experiences. Struck by lightning in 1975, declared clinically dead for 28 minutes. Collapsing of heart failure and having emergency open heart surgery in 1989. And then having to have emergency brain surgery in 1997. All complications from being struck by lightning. There is a life after death, a wondrous, glorious place that awaits us. The near-death experience begins to truly open the door where science and medicine can begin to look at life after death and if there is a heaven. But personally, after going through 3 of these experiences, I'd like to say this. If you don't believe there's a life after death, you're missing the greatest part of your own life.
From that day to this, Dannion Brinkley has devoted his life to helping others. His Compassion in Action organization gives hope and understanding to hundreds each year. For both Howard Storm and Dannion Brinkley, a profound experience with both heaven and hell brought about life-altering changes that brought them close to God and motivated them to share God's love and compassion with others. There are other NDEs that leave the person in a profound state of euphoria, even in the face of tragedy.
I've had a very personal experience. In the accident in 1975, an automobile accident, when my spirit left my body in the emergency room, it was a very real thing. I saw the doctors, I saw my body, and yet I was enjoying a tremendous peace while I watched my body there in pain. And it was just a glorious experience. It was just as real as physical life, but there was a spiritual atmosphere to the whole thing. So I do believe in life after death. I know it exists. I have experienced it.
All of these people appear to have discovered something beyond the experience of the rest of us. But will the rest of us have to die to find out? Or perhaps is there something to be gained about heaven from their depth of knowledge? Someone once said, the wise learn from experience. The wisest learn from the experience of others.
When my spirit left my body, during the time that I was experiencing this wonderful peace, I became concerned about my friends, being worried. And when I thought about them at church, it was like my spirit was transported there. I saw my friend who was the guest speaker that morning, saw him go to the piano, saw him read his scripture text, even saw the Bible. And then later that evening, my sister was in the room with me after I was in a private room, and she was telling me about what comfort they had at the service at the church that morning. And it was annoying me because I wasn't feeling well and I wanted her to quit talking. So I told her, I said, yes, I know all about it, and I finished her sentences and told her what had happened at church. And she knew that my body was in an emergency room at the time this was taking place, but my spirit was in church. A few days later, my friend who had been the guest minister that morning had heard about the experience, and he came to see me because he had heard that I had seen him in the pulpit. And I told him, I said, Cleveland, I saw the page from which you read, and I described it, that his text was had been marked with red markers. And so he brought his Bible over and opened it up, and it was exactly as I had described it, as though I had been looking over his shoulder when he read the text to the congregation that morning.
Can the mystery of heaven and the life hereafter only be found then through faith in God?
Without Jesus Christ, Son of God and Savior, there is no heaven for anyone. He is the way, the truth, and the life. In my experience, and I think in your experience too, there's a longing for heaven deep in our heart. No one longs for extinction. Everybody longs for fulfillment and happiness. I believe that that longing for fulfillment and happiness beyond this world is itself a pointer to heaven, and everybody has it deep inside them. The religious beliefs of people do influence, most definitely, both their belief about heaven and the reality of heaven for them.
For the believer, the acceptance of heaven is a matter of faith. Scientific proof, then, while gratifying, is not necessary to sustain that faith. But as the evidence for heaven gains scientific momentum, it is certain to find its way into a larger arena of public discourse. The medical community is beginning to build a scientific case with these remarkable case studies, but what other promising scientific research is going on? In science's search for heaven, there's the possibility of an answer to the whole question of creation, not just the end of life, but the beginning as well. Is it possible to determine the validity of the anecdotal evidence? What does the world of physics, mathematics, and astronomy have to say about the possibility of life after death? The evidence uncovered so far suggests not only an increasing level of awareness of the spiritual being in all of us, but a growing sense of the importance of that part of us. Due largely to the ability of modern medicine to rescue people from death, an increasing number of people are bearing witness of life beyond the grave. As our search continues, a number of highly qualified researchers are trying to discover ways to demonstrate that these experiences are fact, not fantasy. Some areas of psychological study, for example, still suggest it is our cultural conditioning that actually determines what we think about death and heaven. According to this line of reasoning, we interpret our experiences based on what we have been taught or our worldview. Could it be as simple as that? Dr. Kenneth Ring, the author of Lessons from the Light and Heading Toward Omega, decided to tackle that notion head-on, on the assumption that if cultural conditioning actually sets the stage, so to speak, for the clear and vivid images of a near-death experience, a blind person, particularly someone who has been blind from birth, would have a very different experience.
I recently did a study in which I interviewed 31 persons who were blind about their near-death experiences, including a number who were blind from birth. 80% of these blind persons report being able to see things of this world during their near-death encounters. When people talk about near-death experiences and describe them in heavenly terms, they often talk about a realm of tremendous dazzling light, of supernal beauty, and a feeling of total unconditional acceptance and love. I think one effect of having interviewed so many people about their near-death experiences on me personally is that it's made me feel a lot more comfortable about death. I think death is, I wouldn't say it's something to look forward to, but I don't think we have to have anything to fear in the moment of death itself, however painful the process of dying may be.
Again, I think the near-death experience is a dying experience. It's not an after-death experience. These people are not going to heaven and hell and coming back and telling us what it's like. I do think that it's a powerful spiritual experience during the dying process. It's on the road, but it's not actually there. So it suggests that there is a spiritual realm that's leading somewhere, but exactly where is not what the near-death experience is going to tell us.
The Apostle Paul tells us to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. What's going to tell us where we're going, where heaven actually is, and how we go about getting there? Are near-death and out-of-body experiences the only tangible evidence of the road to heaven?
Besides near-death experiences, there are two pieces of evidence that indicate the reality of heaven. First, there is considerable evidence that God exists, and if God exists, it's quite likely that there is an afterlife, because He would not create people and then snuff them out of existence. Secondly, there is solid historical evidence that Jesus of Nazareth actually rose bodily from the dead. If that is a historical fact, as I believe the evidence indicates, then He has been to the afterlife and come back and told us what it's like. He can speak with authority, therefore, because He has actually seen it since He rose from the dead Himself.
The most provocative evidence that we have that there is a heaven is what God's Word says about it. Heaven cannot be proved scientifically, so we have to have faith in what God said in His Word.
From the Christian point of view, of course, faith is the most important factor. But accepting that, what about scientific progress? What kind of interest is there in the scientific community? It may come as a surprise to many that from the late 17th century until today, there have been many highly respected scientists who have been working to prove that immortality is a natural physical phenomenon and its study is in fact a branch of physics. J.J. Thomson, who discovered the electron, is among that group, as is Thomas Alva Edison. And one of the world's lesser-known but most prolific scientists and inventors, a man by the name of George Meek, gave up a highly profitable career and sold most of his businesses in order to pursue his quest for the possibility of a life hereafter. Long recognized as a brilliant American scientist and inventor with scores of industrial patents, George Meek, at age 60, retired and began 25 years of intensive research into life after death. He traveled the world to locate and to establish research projects with top medical doctors, psychiatrists, physicists, biochemists, ministers, priests, and rabbis. In 1987, he published the conclusions of his quarter-of-a-century research.
For the first time in 8,000 years of recorded history, we can say with certainty that our mind, memory, personality, and soul will survive physical death.
But if our soul survives, is there any research to tell us where it will be? Dr. R.C. Sproul thinks he may have an answer.
When we talk about the whereness of heaven, I believe that it is a place, but it's a different kind of place. It's a place that's that crosses a dimension, a dimensional barrier, which in terms of our concept of dimensional space, it could be right here, it could be right next door, but into another realm, beyond, transcendentally beyond the three-dimensional type of reality that we experience normally.
The Bible teaches that heaven is in the northernmost part of the universe. Isaiah talks about Lucifer leading a rebellion against God in the sides of the north. Job 26 talks about heaven, God making heaven and stretched it over an empty place. Scientists know there is a hole in the northernmost part of the universe. Perhaps heaven is just beyond that, about 21 billion light years away.
But whether heaven is right next door or beyond our gaze someplace out there in the sky, we can be sure it's there. If, for example, it's been proven, as George Meek suggests, that we live on after physical death, the clear implication is that there must be a place, a geography for heaven. Could it be that we must become as a little child to find it? Dr. Melvin Morse, a leading world authority on dying children, described himself as an arrogant critical care physician with an emotional bias against anything spiritual. But that was before he began a series of scientifically based studies of dying children. He found that many others had already arrived at the conclusions he would soon come to.
Good. So then that's what we'll do.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
You bet.
When I review the medical literature, I think it points clearly to scientific evidence that something survives human death. This evidence includes case reports, reviews of the existing scientific literature, as well as direct experimental evidence, all causing a growing body of evidence in the scientific community, making it respectable to speculate that something survives human death.
I think the message of the near-death experience is that there is something there other than our physical reality. There is a spiritual realm. I also think that there's the message of God. There is a God there. It's similar to the general revelation that we see in the first chapter of Romans that Paul wrote in the New Testament, that the law of God is written on the hearts of all men. And I think that the near-death experience is bringing that to the person's awareness at the time they're in the process of dying.
Some people have come to me with a question, isn't there some middle ground between skeptics and believers in certain religions about this issue of heaven, or hell for that matter? My point of view is there is absolutely no middle ground. Either heaven exists or it doesn't exist. The important thing is to find out, if it does exist, what is necessary, what's involved, and what authority do you use to know that it exists. When you go to the Bible and you look at the 668 historical prophecies, all shown to be true, that gives you some confidence that any future activities, such as life after death and heaven, would also be true.
Among a growing group of scientists who seem to be accepting of the notion of an eternal spirit is Dr. Stephen Hawking, widely regarded as the most brilliant scientific mind of this or perhaps any age. In what many regard as a complete turnabout, Dr. Hawking, in his book, The Theory of Everything, The Origin and the Fate of the Universe, writes,
it would be very difficult to explain why the universe should have begun in just this way, except as the act of a God who intended to create beings like us. The whole history of the universe can be said to be the work of God. However, if we do discover a complete period should, in time, be understandable by everyone, not just a few scientists. If we find the answer to that, it would be the ultimate triumph of human reason, for then we would know the mind of God.
At long last, the discussion is out on the scientific table. And Hawking is not the only scientist who has opened his mind to the intriguing possibilities of a world that was created especially for immortal life. Nobel Prize-winning biochemist Francis Crick states, "The origin of life appears to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions that would have to be satisfied to get it going." The internationally renowned physicist Paul Davies concedes that it is in the fundamental constants of nature that we find the most surprising evidence for a grand design. Another Nobel Prize winner in the field of physiology and medicine, John C. Eccles, asserts that in some mysterious way, God is the creator of all living forms, and particularly in human persons, each with conscious selfhood of an immortal soul. And astronomer Owen Gingerich states flatly that, "Just as I believe the book of Scripture illuminates the path to God, so I believe the book of nature, with its astonishing details, a blade of grass, or the resonant levels of the carbon atom, also suggest a God of purpose, a God of design." With God now in the picture as the author of that grand design, the discussion suddenly branches out into other scientific areas. Is there anything that can bring the assurance of religion and the pragmatism of science together? Well, perhaps there is. In his new book, Dr. T. Lee Bauman suggests the unifying concept may be light.
In my research, I have tried to look closely at the latest information on near-death experiences, at the latest thinking in quantum physics, at new interpretations of information from the Bible, as well as the mysterious, fascinating nature of light. Other researchers, notably Drs. Moody and Morse, have found light to be the keynote event, the element that always leads to a transformation in their lives. But the question is, why light? Why not darkness? Physiologically, isn't death a descent into darkness? Yet Dannion Brinkley and almost all others who have experienced near death see light. Why? The fact is, there is no rational medical explanation for this occurrence. Einstein, however, showed us in the flow of light the corollary of the eternal now. Today, more scientists are recognizing the significance of the electromagnetic radiation that pervades our daily lives, including light. Incredibly, physicists have performed experiments that even suggest light is conscious. That is to say, in these experiments, light appears to be capable of making decisions. If a relationship possibly exists between light and a supreme being, perhaps it manifests in ways that have already been revealed to those who over the centuries have been believers in God.
Scripture abounds with references that are especially meaningful in this new context. In Psalms 104 we read, "O Lord my God, thou art very great. Thou art clothed with honor and majesty, who coverest thyself with light as with a garment." John chapter 8 verse 12 says, "Again Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." And in 1 John chapter 1 verse 5, a clear testimony is given. "This is the message we have heard from him and proclaimed to you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all." This barely scratches the surface of both the Old and New Testament references concerning God manifesting himself as light.
The Bible is replete with references to light, its power and function. Could it be that science, after all these years, is about to write a preamble to the book of Genesis? In a universe teeming with all kinds of interstellar activity, it seems odd that critics and skeptics still maintain that there is nothing out there except empty space. But then critics and skeptics have been known to be wrong. Prior to Christopher Columbus, the experts believed the world was flat. And even in a more sophisticated world, many skeptics still didn't get it. Too many of them, even to count, stated that it was ridiculous.
The 13th chapter of the apocalyptic book of John the Revelator presents a graphic portrayal of two megalomaniac beasts, powers that rule at some time during the history of planet Earth, whose ability to influence and dictate extend to the furthest corners of the globe. It is revealed through biblical evidence that these powers receive their authority from the dragon, which according to the scriptures is Satan. It is further revealed through the symbolic language contained in this chapter that a cosmic battle of gigantic proportions between good and evil is finding its tangible fulfillment in the physical activities of human affairs, the visible symptoms of a massive spiritual controversy. The Bible describes a deliberate cooperation between the powers of the spiritual and physical realms. A cooperation between the highest levels of human operation and authorities of sinister spiritual dimensions that span almost the entire history of humanity. As hard as this may be for many to accept, there is little doubt that in order for such an all-encompassing effort to find its decreed fulfillment, a conspiracy of unimagined proportions needed to be conceived. Indeed, only as we embark on an in-depth exploration of history will we be able to reveal the specific identity of the powers, human and otherwise, that are hidden in the cryptic descriptions of prophetic symbolism. In light of these considerations and current events, what you are about to witness could very well be one of the most significant and timely exposés of recent times.
Our journey begins in the context of a perfect society that existed eons ago. A society whose laws of coexistence were based on the perfect principles of love for their fellow beings and love for God who created them. In this perfect society, where God gave every being the freedom to choose whether they would remain loyal to Him and His government or not, Lucifer, an angel of supreme authority and power, began to question the fairness of the government of God and aspired to put himself in the place of God. The war that followed this rebellion against the laws of God, resulting in the expulsion of Lucifer from heaven, along with a third of the angels that chose to side with him, ultimately shifted the focus of the battle to the human inhabitants of a newly created planet called Earth. Lucifer's strategy of destruction and revenge was comprehensive and multifaceted in its dimensions. But at the core of his plan was the desire to usurp the worship that belonged to God alone and direct it toward himself. From the very first insinuations presented to Eve at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden, and consequently through succeeding ages, Lucifer has attempted to set up a counterfeit system of law and religious worship, very often in the process blending aspects of his own false system with characteristics of the true. This fallen angel, who now carried the dubious title of Satan, the Prince of Darkness, began to channel his ideas through human agents that not only communicated his deceptions, but became actively involved in establishing his cause in the real world. Direct links from present-day manifestations of his plan can be traced back to the post-antediluvian world and the Genesis account of the building of the Tower of Babel and the occult belief system that inspired its construction. Connected to this was the desire to establish a so-called perfect society based on satanically inspired ideals that would supposedly help man to escape the wrath of God should he ever decide to destroy the world again. Man's quest to control his own destiny and to worship a God that would give him freedom to define his own values and moral parameters was the central desire in his pursuit to bring all other humanity under his control and establish a new global order. Those throughout history who sought to implement this plan would stop at nothing, be it through deception or brute force, to realize their dream. A dream to rebuild the mythical city of Atlantis, described by Plato 2,500 years ago and believed by many to have existed in the antediluvian world. And along with this, to re-establish the principles that guided that society. The question will no doubt be asked: who, what, and if anything, is involved in the pursuit of this apparently far-fetched occult agenda today? If such a mystical concept as a perfect Atlantean society is in fact believed in and being implemented, then who are the players and what powers, human or otherwise, might these players have at their disposal? Indeed, can history, the Bible, and the unfolding of present-day events really confirm the veracity of such an agenda? There are those who believe that this is not only possible, but that there is overwhelming evidence to establish it as fact.
"400 years ago, Bacon, like many of his contemporaries, believed that Atlantis was America itself."
He was trying to lay a foundation for what could be accomplished in the New World. Bacon was the head of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism.
He had a huge influence through being the chief of the Rosicrucian fraternity at the time. He had a huge influence on the birth of modern Freemasonry. And many of those Rosicrucians actually went into Freemasonry at that time to lift it up to its new level. And Freemasonry has a major influence on the founding of America.
president talks about how we want to bring democracy to all these countries of the world. Well, why doesn't he want to bring a republic to these countries? We were a republic. We were never a democracy. It is only the people from the mystery religions and the secret societies who are pushing this idea of world democracy, or this combination of enlightened nations, enlightened democracies to rule the world. As incredible as it may seem, there are really people who believe that. They're working full-time to accomplish that goal. And until you understand that they are the primary force behind the wars of this last century and World War III, which we are entering into today, unless they understand that the whole idea is to create this reestablishment of what they believe is lost Atlantis.
When our founders declared a new order of the ages, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled.
Various evidences may undoubtedly point to America as being the nation to fulfill the Luciferian dream of a new Atlantis. But what sinister mechanisms have moved over centuries of time to push this nation in the direction of fulfilling this calling? It is not a simple task to discover all the players that make up the complicated web of secret societies and their connected organizations. Many researchers focus on one or two aspects, but hardly ever connect all the dots so as to bring one to a view of the power that controls and negotiates the course that all of its subservient bodies pursue. It is only as one goes back to the ancient revelations that God gave to his prophets that you can effectively begin to see the complete picture unfold. Many believe that the primary key to unlocking and understanding the prophetic code of Scripture is to be found in Daniel's record of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2.
Daniel chapter 2 is quite an amazing prophecy. In fact, it is a prophecy that lasts 2,500 years. It begins with the head of gold, which represents Babylon. Then it follows to the silver arms and chest that represents Medo-Persia. And then from Medo-Persia, it extends down to the Grecian Empire, the bronze belly and thighs. And then finally, the legs are completely of iron, representing the Roman Empire. And then the feet represent the division of the Roman Empire into 10 parts in 476 AD. So in that prophecy, it consists the history from all the way from Babylon, all the way up to the very end of time. And in the prophecy ends when the rock strikes the image and destroys it, which represents the second coming of Christ.
In Daniel, we have a key to the book of Revelation. In fact, the two books, Daniel and Revelation, go hand in hand. The symbolism that we find in the book of Revelation is actually borrowed from the whole of the Bible, but the images are borrowed from the book of Daniel specifically. Jesus says in Matthew 24, when he was questioned about the signs of the end, that we should study the book of Daniel.
The belief is that when one discovers the keys to unlock the symbolic language of Bible prophecy and builds upon this vision, you are able to, far more effectively, interpret the subsequent prophecies found in Daniel 7, 8, 9, and onwards. Indeed, in light of these prophecies and the record of history and present events, Revelation chapter 13, with its description of two powerful beasts, practically becomes an open book. It is thus expedient, in order to accurately expose these baleful powers that have been attempting to manipulate the course of human history, to take a more comprehensive journey into the ancient writings of biblical prophecy.
We have to use biblical criteria in order to deal with biblical things. So I've put together a little dictionary here of prophetic terms where they are defined in the Bible, and we have to use the Bible definitions. A trumpet or a wind are symbols of war in the Bible. Water or sea in the Bible represents nations when it's in a prophetic sense. The waters you saw are peoples and nations and multitudes and kings. Revelation 17 verse 5. And a beast in the Bible, in a prophetic sense, is a kingdom. Daniel chapter 7 verse 17 says, "And the beasts which you saw are kingdoms or kings." And a king stands for a kingdom. A horn in the Bible also represents a king or a kingdom. So out of a kingdom can arise a number of horns. That means the kingdom will disintegrate and many kingdoms will arise out of that kingdom.
Daniel chapter 7 is a classic example of how God many times teaches in His Word. He will say something once, and then He will enlarge upon it, the repeat enlarge principle as it's called in the Bible. And we see the exact same order as we find in Daniel 2. For example, the first beast of Daniel 7, which is the lion with eagle's wings, represents Babylon. And then as you go to the next beast, which would be the bear, with 3 ribs in its mouth raised up on one side, it would represent Medo-Persia. And then the third beast is the leopard with 4 wings, representing the swiftness and speed in which the Grecian Empire came to power under the auspices of Alexander the Great. And then the fourth world ruling empire we find is a beast that's hard to describe. It has 10 horns. It looks very hideous from what the Bible says in Daniel 7. But the interesting thing is that the teeth are made of iron, so it represents the Roman Empire. And then after that, we have another new facet of information, that a little horn comes up on the fourth beast, which is Rome. It has Roman roots. It comes out of Rome, so it could not have come up per se in North America. It could not have come up in the Middle East, but it must be a Roman Empire. It must come up from Europe, and the roots are definitely Roman.
Out of the ruins of the Roman Empire, there gradually arose a new order of states whose central point was the Papal See. Therefore, inevitably resulted a position not only new, but very different from the former. The Church and Churches, page 42 and 43. This is a Roman Catholic source, saying that here was a different situation. Historian Thomas Hobbes says, if a man consider the origin of the great ecclesiastical dominion, he will easily perceive that the papacy is none other than the ghost of the deceased Roman Empire sitting crowned upon the grave thereof. Okay, so Rome is not really gone. It's called the Roman Catholic Church. The Most Holy Councils, volume 13, Rome says, we define that the Holy Apostolic See and the Roman Pontiff holds the primacy over how much of the world? The whole world. That's interesting. The Vicar of the Incarnate Son of God, anointed High Priest and Supreme Temporal Ruler, the Pope sat in his tribunal impartially to judge between nation and nation, people and prince, sovereign and subject. Henry Condell Manning, temporal power of the Vicar of Jesus Christ. So did they say that they were in control of all the other kingdoms? Yes or no? Yes, they claim so themselves. So there are 2 biblical definitions of blasphemy. The one is if you say that you are God, and the other one is if you say that you can forgive sins. Well, what does the Rome say? Here's the Catholic Encyclopedia, volume 12, article on the Pope. It says, this judicial authority will even include the power to pardon sin. Now let's read papal statements, Ferraris Ecclesiastical Dictionary. The Pope is of so great dignity and so exalted that he is not a mere man, but as it were God and the Vicar of God. So there's a papal statement where the papacy claims to be God, just like the Roman Emperor claimed to be God. So he says it himself. Pope Leo said, we hold upon this earth the place of God Almighty.
And the bull Unum Sanctum put forth by Boniface the Eighth in 1303 says that he is equal with God. And in fact, he is God on earth. I quoted my book. So the Pope, because he believes he's God on earth, he always dresses in white. And that's why every political visitor to the Pope always dresses in black.
How would the papal system be able to infiltrate all other bodies, religious and political, to realize her agenda of global control? In this case, one does not have to look too far to begin to expose the methods and mechanisms by which she would accomplish this task.
So we have this great Hegelian dialectic going on since 1536, when the Jesuit order was founded by Ignatius Loyola, when it was authorized by Pope Paul III in 1514, when it was brought into the papacy. And now we have this war of the Reformation and Reformed countries, including the Bible, which is the foundation for all Reformed countries, warring against the Counter-Reformation, Ignatius Loyola and his Council of Trent, and his hatred for the Bible and getting it out of the hands of the people. The Jesuits had really assumed universal political power by 1750. And the huge fortune that the order was amassing was then used to finance things like the 30 Years' War, to wipe out the Protestants of Europe. And so the Jesuits had this huge, tremendous financial power. They had revived Freemasonry in 1717, which was really the Knights Templars in 1717 through the Scotland, because remember the Templars took up residence in Scotland, and so we have Scottish Rite Freemasonry being created, and the high rites, the first 25 degrees of Scottish Rite Freemasonry were written in the College of Clermont in Paris, France, while the Jesuits were overseeing that, and the purpose for the Scottish Rite was to reintroduce the Stuarts back onto the throne of England, because the Stuarts had been expelled, they had been fighting, or they had been expelled in what, 1688, 1689. So the Jesuits revived Freemasonry for the purpose of expanding their temporal power. So by 1750 you have Masons in every court, you have the Jesuit confessors to all the kings.
Well, the origins were from the mind of a person by the name of Ignatius Loyola. Originally it was intended as a counter-Reformation move. They wanted to destroy every aspect of the Reformation, the civilization and the culture that it spawned, the freedoms that were enjoyed by the Reformists, everything that was biblically based. They wanted to eradicate it and eventually papalize or Romanize everyone to come under the authority, ultimately, of the Vatican. The Jesuit oath of the fourth vow, which is the last vow that they take before they become commanders, you know, like the leaders in that, they come right out and state exactly, you know, how they infiltrate any religious group they want. They'll come in pretending to be a Pentecostal, pretending to be a Baptist, pretending to be, you know, anything they want to, you know, and ingratiating themselves into the various congregations, taking the leadership role, and then completely subverting it from the inside.
I now, in the presence of Almighty God and you, my ghostly Father, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, founded by St. Ignatius Loyola, do by the womb of the Virgin and the matrix of God and the rod of Jesus Christ, declare and swear that His Holiness the Pope is Christ Viceroy Regent and is the true and only head of the Catholic or Universal Church throughout the earth. Therefore, to the utmost of my power, I shall and will defend this doctrine and His Holiness right and custom against all usurpers of the heretical or Protestant authority, and all adherents in regards that they be usurped and heretical, opposing the Sacred Mother, Church of Rome. I do further promise and declare that notwithstanding I am dispensed with to assume any religion heretical for the propagating of the Mother Church's interest, I do further promise and declare that I will have no opinion or will of my own, or any mental reservation whatsoever, even as a corpse, but will unhesitatingly obey each and every command that I may receive from my superiors in the militia of the Pope and of Jesus Christ. I furthermore promise and declare that I will wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants and liberals, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth, and that I will hang, burn, waste, boil, and flay, and strangle and bury alive these infamous heretics, rip up the stomachs of the wombs of their women, and crush their infant heads against the walls, in order to annihilate forever their execrable race.
There was no crime too great for them to commit, no deception too base for them to practice, no disguise too difficult for them to assume. Vowed to perpetual poverty and humility, it was their studied aim to secure wealth and power, to be devoted to the overthrow of Protestantism and the re-establishment of the papal supremacy. Every cardinal, archbishop, and bishop in the Catholic Church takes an oath of allegiance to the Pope, in which occur the following words: heretics, schismatics, and rebels to our said Lord, the Pope, or his aforesaid successors, I will to my utmost persecute and oppose.
The secret bodies that have arisen during and since the time Ignatius Loyola established the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order, are many and complex. The secret societies such as the Freemasons, Illuminati, Jacobins, the Rosicrucians, and the notorious Skull and Bones, numerous though they may be, it is the educated belief of many that these organizations are but the servants of the Jesuit order, and thus naturally, knowingly or unknowingly, the vassals of Papal Rome. The connection between the secret societies and clubs has been well established by many leading researchers.
Now, Gary H. Carr, in his work En route to global occupation, puts it this way. He says there were the ancient mystery religions which come from Babylon, and they were pantheistic, of course, which means God is in nature, God is in everything, which in effect makes us God then too. This was inculcated in Kabbalism, was taken over in the Christian era in what is called Gnosticism, and the Knights Templars were the inner secret core that had the ancient knowledge of the mystics. This was carried further through Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, and the Illuminati, which, according to Gary Carr, controls Marxism, American European secret societies and political societies, international banking, and the World Council of Churches. Now, the Templars, they had their secret inner information inculcated in the Rosicrucians and the Jesuits. The Jesuits, again, formed and created Freemasonry. And Freemasonry was created as the Protestant arm of the Roman Catholic Church. Unbeknown to them, beguiled, fooled, if you like, into doing the work that Rome wanted them to do, so that Rome could sit in the background while Freemasonry did it for them.
Louis XV said to Jesuit General Lorenzo Ricci, he said, please let the Jesuit order change some way. And Lorenzo Ricci said, let them be as they are, or else not be. So the Jesuits never changed. So what did they do? They went underground, and they started a series of networks. And one of those networks was the Bavarian Illuminati, because Bavaria was the strongest Jesuit stronghold north of the Alps, which throws light on who really started the Nazi war machine out of Bavaria. So the Jesuits start the Illuminati with Adam Weishaupt out of Bavaria, and they then import the French Revolution into France because the Jesuits were protected during their suppression by the Lutheran, or Frederick the Great, and by the Russian Catherine the Great. So the Jesuits are protected by a Russian monarch and by a German monarch, a Lutheran monarch, which Frederick should have never done. But you see, Frederick was the head of all Freemasonry on the continent. And so the Jesuits used Frederick then to write the last 8 degrees up to the 33rd degree. Frederick starts the Council of the 33rd degree, and then it was the work of Frederick and the Jesuits who ultimately they imported the French Revolution into France through the Grand Orient Lodge, because now we have what's called Illuminized Freemasonry.
In this case, the saying, "all roads lead to Rome," is most certainly applicable. Adam Weishaupt, founder of the Illuminati, and Voltaire, author of the Charter of Human Rights, and both motivators of the French Revolution, were Jesuit trained and included the essence of that institution's philosophy and methodology into their own organizations.
The Illuminati was created through Weishaupt, and, of course, is also the father of modern communism, who with his Jacobins conducted the French Revolution. Years later, Jesuit General Ledochowski with his Bolsheviks conducted the Russian Revolution in 1917, and it's identical to the other revolution. Let's have a look at Freemasons. The Grand Design Exposed says, "The truth is the Jesuits of Rome have perfected Freemasonry to be their most magnificent and effective tool, accomplishing their purposes among Protestants." Now surely the members of Freemasonry themselves must be deceived, because if they saw it, they wouldn't do it, right? So actually, the order is being used, and they themselves are deceived. And only within the order, higher up, are those chosen ones who know, and they are controlled by the Jesuits for Rome. Very clever. Very clever. To make Protestantism do what you cannot do openly because you have been fingered by Protestantism as the Antichrist.
Based on these evidences, the religio-political claims of the papal system and the prophetic time frames given for her rule, many modern-day biblical scholars and researchers into secret subversive organizations have concluded that no other institution other than Rome can fit the prophetic profile. Added to these evidences is the testimony of the Protestant reformers, who clearly, through their own studies of Daniel and Revelation, saw Rome as the Antichrist power described in Bible prophecy. When studying the book of Revelation chapter 13 and applying the principles of interpreting prophetic symbolism, the full impact of what begins to unfold in Daniel and the direct connection it has to this very era starts to become frightfully clear. The first beast of this chapter, that contains elements of a leopard, a bear, and a lion, seem to indicate that John is seeing the primary elements of the vision of Daniel 7 in reverse. These powers have passed, and qualities of their systems, judicial, political, and religious, survive in the institutions that arise after them. most specifically in the kingdoms and nations that now fall under the authority of Papal Rome.
So this is a conglomerate beast having components, philosophies if you like, of Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and Babylon. And it speaks with the mouth of a lion.
In Daniel 7, we have all of these beasts described in detail. And then when we come to the book of Revelation, verses 1 and 2, it describes an amalgamation of all the beasts in Daniel 7 put together. And the Bible student would recognize when they come to Revelation 13 that this is taken word for word from Daniel as far as the beast combining. And not only that, the description of the little horn power in Daniel 7 is the same description we find in Revelation 13. For example, one of those criteria is that it would receive worship, it would speak blasphemy and all sorts of different things, and those are all found in Revelation 13. In Daniel chapter 7 and in Revelation 13, we see the same time period emphasized, the 1,260 days. It's described 7 times in the Bible in many different ways. Time times half a time, 42 months. And we see this exact same time period mentioned in Revelation 13, which describes how long the papal supremacy would be in power, from 538, the decree of Justinian, to 1798, when the papacy was dissolved of its political power, when Berthier marched into Rome and took the Pope captive. So we find all of those clues right there in both of the chapters, Daniel 7 and Revelation 13.
Labanca, professor of history at the University of Rome, says, to the succession of the Caesars came the succession of the pontiffs in Rome. Stanley's history says the popes filled the place of the vacant emperor at Rome, inheriting their power, prestige, titles from paganism. Constantine left all to the Bishop of Rome, which is not true, but nevertheless, the papacy is about but the ghost of the deceased Roman Empire sitting crowned upon its grave. So the legally recognized supremacy of the Pope began in 538 AD and then went into effect the Emperor's decree, as I have said, where he was the corrector of heretics. So Rome today still claims to be the sole one who can determine what you should believe, because the papacy claims infallibility. He even has the title Pontifex Maximus, which belonged to the Roman Emperor. So in effect, the Pope is the Emperor of Rome today. I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death. So there is a mortal wound. And his deadly wound was healed, and some in the world wondered after the beast. Oh no, it doesn't say that. It says, all the world wondered after the beast. Revelation 13:7 says, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. That's scary. Rome will control the entire world.
The same characteristics found in Daniel 7 once again serve to describe this beast of Revelation 13. The period of rule, this time denoted in months, is identical, and thus students of prophecy who use the historicist method of prophetic interpretation conclude that this is a description of the Catholic institution that now, according to greater revelation, receives a wound that later on is healed. When this wound was given in 1798, at the time of General Berthier's entrance into Rome, the captivity of the Pope and the abolishment of the papal government, most observers believed at that time that it signaled the end of Roman Catholic rule. But in 1929, Mussolini and Gaspari signed an historic pact that once again returned to Papal Rome her sovereign nation status. The implications of these events and the prophetic revelations of chapter 13 are hard to avoid. Not only does Papal Rome rule for the 1,260 42-month period, but its authority is once again revived, not only through the actions of Mussolini and Gaspari in 1929, but through the help of another beast. A power that arises out of the earth and causes the whole earth to follow Rome in her new revived form. Many believe that the identity of this second beast can only be applied to the United States of America, the new Atlantis of the mystics that would bring about the final realization of a new world order. Revelation chapter 13 verse 11 states, "And I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and it had 2 horns like that of a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon."
Well, let's go to the early reformers. These people were magnificent. I have so much respect for these early reformers. John Wesley, in his notes on Revelation 13, written in 1754, says, "The 2-horned beast, he is not yet come, though he cannot be far off. For he is to appear at the end of the 42 months of the first beast." Now, the reformers all clearly said Rome is the Antichrist. They were watching it. And now they say, well, this other beast can't be far off. Let's have a look at the rise of the United States and see if it fits. The Declaration of Independence was in 1776. The independence was acknowledged by the nations of the world in 1783. In 1787, a Constitution of the United States was framed. 1791, the Bill of Rights was added. And in 1798, the very year that Rome receives a mortal wound, France, the mightiest power in Europe at that time, recognizes the independence of the United States. So the same nation that gives the papacy a mortal wound, in the same year recognizes the United States.
America was founded as a Christian nation, but it was also founded as an occult nation. And there have always been 2 parallel forces here in America. One the Christian, one the occult, dating back into the 1600s. And until you understand that, you can't understand anything going on in the world today.
From the very beginning, those who were trying to establish the nation of America and formulate the laws that would govern her people were caught between 2 agendas. The one agenda had lamb-like qualities that sought to avoid repeating the oppressive history of a Europe ruled by papal religio-political authority. The other agenda, although it outwardly preached liberation, was striving to set up an occult-inspired order that would finally lead all nations back to Rome. In Rome, all the mystery religions, from ancient Babylon and Egypt to the various other pagan cultures whose spiritual roots went back to the Tower of Babel, found their fulfillment. In her and under her supervision, and only under these circumstances, would man be able to experience 1,000 years of peace, the fulfillment of the Aquarian dream and its new Atlantean society. Rome fought hard to destroy the lamb-like attributes of the American Constitution. Through her secret army, the Jesuits, and the various other sinister organizations she controlled, she infiltrated American society and government, and where necessary fomented discord, controversy, and division. President Abraham Lincoln said of her involvement in the Civil War,
"The Civil War would never have been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuits. We owe it to popery that we now see our land reddened with the blood of our noblest sons. Through all their councils, theologians, and canon laws, their conscience orders them to burn my wife, strangle my children, and cut my throat when they find their opportunity. Sooner or later, the light of common sense will make it clear to everyone that no liberty of conscience can be granted to men who are sworn to obey a pope who pretends to have the right to put to death those who differ from him in religion."
Rome held the American Constitution, its separation of church and state, and the privilege of people to enjoy freedom of religion in contempt.
Rome's reaction to the Constitution of the United States, of course, was not favorable because the whole papal system was built on the union of church and state. And for a country now to come into being, which was giving liberty and freedom to all, was certainly contrary to the principles of the papacy. And consequently, as a result, Rome has worked through the centuries to try to change that and to overthrow the Constitution of the United States and to once again bring into being that deadly wound is going to be healed, and when it is finally healed, it will once again be church and state united, and the church will use the political powers and the civil powers to enforce her religious dogmas.
Decade after decade, Rome silently infiltrated the highest echelons of American society, until finally the dragon-like qualities of America began to reveal its shadowy visage. Meanwhile, Rome had not forgotten her agenda to re-establish her authority in Europe. Using the same strategy she was employing in America, she set about infiltrating the religious and political powers on the continent. Her task was easier in that familiar environment and very quickly began to bear fruit. While she was actively involved in setting up a socialist regime in Russia, she just as ardently worked at establishing the occult, Jesuit-inspired system of Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany.
And according to the Jesuits, their own house organ, La Civiltà Cattolica, they say fascism is the form of government that comports most with the Roman Catholic Church. So fascism is internationalist, it's expansionist, it's dominated by monopolistic corporations that the Knights of Malta own, and it talks about God, quote unquote. Communism, on the other hand, is internationalist, it's expansionist, it's oppressive, it has concentration camps just like the fascists, except it denies the existence of God. The only difference is in its religious confession. Other than that, both systems are identical. And it goes back to the maxims that extremes meet. So fascism and communism are both run by the Jesuit order. Openly, the Jesuits back fascism. Secretly, they rule communism. And they control both leaders at the same time and coordinate their political moves to benefit the Jesuit order. The Jesuit Edmund Walsh says in his book, Total Empire, that the fall of the Russian Empire was the greatest single event apart from the fall of the Roman Empire in 476. That's how much the Jesuits wanted this. They said that if we do not succeed in this, it would be as though we lost the Reformation.
World War II was an opportunity that Rome could not afford to bypass. While she secretly supported Hitler, she was also actively involved in trying to establish herself in Croatia.
One-third of the Serbs we shall kill, another we shall deport, and the last we shall force to embrace the Roman Catholic religion and thus melt them into Croats. Corpses of children starved to death in the notorious concentration camp of Jasenovac, one of whose commandants had been ordained a Franciscan monk, Father Filipovic. Ante Pavlovic, president of Croatia, during World War II, wanted by Yugoslavia for the killing of 700,000 Serbs and Jews during his 3.5 years as the Axis Viceroy. Until now, we have worked for the Catholic faith with the prayer book and with the cross. Now the time has come to work with rifle and revolver.
When asked if she could explain why the Catholic atrocities of the war were not as well known as those of the Nazi ones, she responded, "Nazi Germany is no more. The Catholic Church is still here with us, more powerful than ever, with her own press and the world press at her bidding. Anything published about the atrocities in the future will not be believed."
The course of war, regardless of the victor, was simply another stage in the process of fulfilling Rome's ultimate secret agenda. The world wars had long been part of the layered strategy formulated within the silent confines of Jesuit-controlled secret societies.
Albert Pike and Mazzini were used by the Jesuits then to design 3 world wars to restore the Pope's universal power in the earth. And some people deny the existence of that letter. And we have to remember that that letter was on display at the British Museum for many years until somehow, some way, it just disappeared. So indeed they did design 3 world wars, and those wars were calculated to do that in the end, make the Pope the universal monarch of the world.
The aftermath of war presented Rome's global henchmen with a golden opportunity to institute another mechanism that would take the world one step closer to a global New World Order. Spiritualists such as Theosophy's New Age prophetess Alice Bailey and world thought leaders such as Robert Muller, Teilhard de Chardin, Arthur Balfour and Hess had long predicted the coming of an age of global peace that would prepare the way for the coming of the New Age Christ. The establishment of the United Nations was immediately recognized as the tool for accomplishing this end. It was clear to those at the helm of the UN's mission what their ultimate purpose encompassed.
Now this is a very interesting man, Robert Muller. He's the former Assistant Secretary General to the United Nations, but he is today the mover in the spiritual field within the United Nations. He's also called the Prophet of Hope of the United Nations. He wrote, "We must move as quickly as possible to a one-world government, a one-world religion, under a one-world leader." The leading influence on their spiritual awakening was again Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. You remember who he was? Jesuit priest. See, they have Catholicism, the Jesuits, the top movers in the United Nations. Now, what did Robert Muller, the former Assistant Secretary General, have to say? He wrote, "Teilhard de Chardin had always viewed the United Nations as the progressive institutional embodiment of his philosophy." Teilhard wrote, "Although the form is not yet discernible, mankind tomorrow will awaken to a pan-organized world." And Robert Muller writes, "Any Teilhardian will recognize in this the spiritual transcendence which he announced so emphatically as the next step in our evolution. A general convergence of religions upon a universal Christ who satisfied them all. That's what Teilhard de Chardin said, Christianity and evolution. This is his quote. His quote. So a convergence of religion that satisfies them all. And he saw the United Nations as the embodiment of this philosophy. That seems to me the only possible conversion of the world and the only form in which a religion of the future can be conceived. Robert Miller writes in World Core Curriculum the following. Now this is stunning. The underlying philosophy upon which the Robert Miller School, now what is the Robert Miller School? We'll have to come to that. Robert Miller School is the education program for the entire world as will be enforced by the United Nations. That's scary. Let's read on. The underlying philosophy upon which the Robert Miller School is based will be found in the teachings set forth in the books of Alice A. Bailey. Hello? The books of Alice A. Bailey were published originally by Lucifer Publishing Company, which, because of all the flack, they changed to Lucis Trust. Isn't that correct? The school is now certified as a United Nations associated school providing education for international cooperation and peace. Alice A. Bailey claimed evidence of the growth of human intellect along the needed receptive lines for the preparation of the new age can be seen in the planning of various nations and in the efforts of the United Nations to formulate a world plan. From the very start of this unfoldment, three occult factors have governed the development of all these plans. Within the United Nations is a germ and seed of a great international and meditating reflective group. A group of thinking and informed men and women in whose hands lies the destiny of humanity.
While the UN became the visible institution for accomplishing global political security through the creation of its global one-world government, Rome, on the other hand, enthusiastically put into motion her agenda to unify, through the ecumenical movement, the various Christian denominations and, finally, when the time was right, to lead them and ultimately all faiths back to Mother Rome.
And of course, behind the scenes, always, you have the papacy.
And then the churches come together in Assisi in 1986. And at Assisi, all the religions of the world paid homage to the Pope. He became all things to all men, Islam, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism. In 1999, with the Dalai Lama by his side in Rome, 2,000 religious leaders paid homage to him. And they all agreed in condemning who? Christian fundamentalists who abuse speech and whose efforts at converting others incite hatred and violence. All present were in accord on two key points. John Paul II was endorsed by consensus as the planet's chief spiritual overseer, and religious fundamentalists who refuse to go along with the global ecumenical movement are to be silenced. They must be denounced as dangerous extremists full of hate. And then they come and bow down and pay their homage according to the inscription we just read. And the rock band is Italy's band. Music. 3 candles. Masonic ritual. At the Vatican Square. Dalai Lama, the Orthodox, the Muslims, the Eastern religions, sun worship, Zoroastrianism, all of them bowed down to him. Japanese Buddhism, Orthodox. When they do something, they do it well.
The second beast of Revelation 13, the USA, that rose up out of the earth was rapidly losing its lamb-like qualities. A Protestant nation that had established itself on principles of religious freedom and justice for all was now reaching its hand across the Atlantic to grasp the hand of Rome. That which would have been unthinkable to America's founding fathers was now becoming a reality.
When Protestantism shall stretch her hand across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power, our country shall repudiate every principle of its constitution as a Protestant and Republican government. Then we may know that the end is near.
When the United States rules the world, the Catholic Church will rule the world. Archbishop Quigley, 1903.
There's that book, Justin Fulton, that great author, right? Washington in the Lap of Rome. It was written about 1888. Washington in the Lap of Rome, written by this great preacher, Justin Fulton. And it shows how he calls it Rome on the Potomac, completely controlled by the Archbishop of Baltimore. There was a secret wire between Baltimore and the White House telling the president what to do, at least since the days of Grover Cleveland.
Ronald Reagan was the one who started off making a deal which started to contravene the Constitution of the United States. Harry Truman tried to do that in 1951. He got such a blast, even from the pulpit by his own minister, when he wanted to recognize the Vatican, that he dropped it. But Ronald Reagan, no problem, he just did it. One of the earliest goals, as President Reagan says, was to recognize the Vatican as a state and to make them an ally. That's contrary to the American Constitution. So by 1987, Pope John Paul visits the United States. President Reagan meets him and he says, "As you exhort us, we will listen." This is not separation of church and state. "For with all our hearts we yearn to make this good land better still." The Pope is quoted as saying, "I come as a friend of America and of all Americans, Catholics, Orthodox, Jews, all men of goodwill."
2,000 years ago, John recorded regarding the second beast of Revelation 13. "And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men, and he deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by the sword and did live." Protestant America, a nation whose founding fathers clearly understood the nature and danger of Rome and who ardently sought to prevent her from gaining ascendancy in North America, would ironically become the very power to finally lead the whole world back to Rome. One of the prime reasons for the existence of America, freedom from papal oppression, would now become that which she would seek to make null and void. Directors of the CIA, justices of the Supreme Court, military leaders and heads of state, now, whether they realized it or not, became the vassals and puppets of a diabolical system that sought only supremacy and freedom for herself alone.
2,400 of his faithful here to welcome him. He's waving to the crowd. Archbishop Regali is alongside the Pope as he shakes hands with the First Lady.
We honor you for helping to lead a revolution of values and spirit in Central Europe and the former Soviet Union, freeing millions to live by conscience, not coercion, and freeing all of us from the constant fear of nuclear war. Your Holiness, on behalf of all of us gathered here today, indeed on behalf of all the people of our beloved nation, we welcome you back to America.
The people of the United States have been a favored people, but when they restrict religious liberty, surrender Protestantism, and give countenance to popery, the measure of their guilt will be full. National apostasy will be registered in the books of heaven. The result of this apostasy will be national ruin.
The push toward instituting the Roman image in America was not just confined to political and judicial quarters. Religious leaders, knowingly or unknowingly, under the auspices of spiritual unity and in the cause of bringing the nation back to God, would begin pushing for religious legislation and a tighter unity between church and state. One of the major pleas is a call to legislate Sunday sacredness. Little do the churches of the Christian world realize that by legislating Sunday, they will be writing into law the very mark and seal of papal authority.
It's very fascinating what the Roman Catholic Church has to say today on this issue. Most Christians, it comes straight from them, not from me. I didn't make this up. Most Christians assume that Sunday is the biblically approved day of worship. The Roman Catholic Church protests that it transferred Christian worship from the biblical Sabbath, Saturday, to Sunday, and that to try to argue that the change was made in the Bible is both dishonest and a denial of Catholic authority. If Protestantism wants to base its teachings only on the Bible, it should worship on Saturday. It was upon this very point that the Reformation was condemned by the Council of Trent. Wow! Did you know that the whole Reformation failed at the Council of Trent because of the Sabbath issue? The Protestants claim to stand upon the written word only. They profess to hold the Scripture alone as the standard of faith. They justify their revolt by the plea that the Church has apostatized from the written word and follows tradition. Now, the Protestants claim that they stand upon the written word only is not true. The profession of holding Scripture alone as the standard of faith is false. Proof. The written word explicitly adjoins the observance of the seventh day as the Sabbath. They do not observe the seventh day, but reject it. That was his argument. If they truly hold to the Scriptures alone as their standard, they would be observing the seventh day, as enjoined by the Scriptures. Yet they not only reject the observance of the Sabbath enjoined in the written word, but they have adopted and do practice the observance of Sunday, which they have only tradition of the Church. Consequently, the claim of Scripture alone as the standard fails, and the doctrine of Scripture and tradition as essential is fully established, the Protestants themselves being judged.
Rome boasts about the fact that she has changed Sabbath into Sunday, and she even goes so far as to say that the fact that she's done that is a mark of her ecclesiastical authority in religious matters. She doesn't try to hide it. In fact, she boasts about the fact that she did it, and that is her mark of ecclesiastical authority. And when we think of that mark and realizing that the beast, which is a symbol referring to the papal system, is going to enforce that mark one day with laws where no man can buy or sell. And if that doesn't succeed, the time will come in Revelation 13:15 that they will even pass laws where God's people will be killed for being obedient to God and to His Word.
The very thing that became the point on which the papacy had cause to condemn the Protestant movement at the Council of Trent would now rise up as the ghost of history past to be the spiritual magnet to draw all the lost daughters of Rome back into her fold again. The Protestant movement, all its centuries of protest and effort to stay separate from a system which its very founders described as the Antichrist, would now cease to exist, as if it should never have been born in the first place. For all intents and purposes, it can truly be said of today's Christian world, Protestantism is dead.
Suddenly Protestantism collapsed. Weltbild shows the Pope shaking hands with Martin Luther, and it says, from heretic to fellow traveler, from Ketzer zum Weggefährten. And in the biggest Protestant church in Berlin, they have again pictures and statues of Mary and candles and all of those things. Then the Synod of the Lutheran Church got together, heiße Eisen, alte Zöpfe, you know, the old battle between them. Der Papst soll nicht mehr Antichrist genannt werden. The Pope may no longer be called Antichrist. So, that's a big step from Martin Luther, would you agree? And then, I thought I was going to die. Germany calls to ask, forgive Luther. So now, this year, at the Congress in Italy, where the Pope resided, the new Pope, the Protestant Church, the Lutherans, a whole section of them said, we want to be part of the Mother Church again.
Indeed, according to Rome, there is only one true church.
The present Pope wrote this, the churches are no sisters of ours. You know these statements. It must always be clear that the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Universal Church is not the sister but the mother of all the churches. That was Cardinal Ratzinger, the present Pope Benedict.
Some have come to the conclusion that Rome has changed, that she has repented of her bloody megalomaniac past. But these evidences revealed in the very current acts and views of this system should send a clear signal to the world that Rome never changes. The warnings of Revelation chapter 13 should rekindle the fires of Bible-believing Protestantism in the hearts and minds of all who value freedom of religion and would rather choose to bear the mark of God's authority than to carry the mark of the Roman curse. In chapter 13, verses 16 to 17, these words are spoken with regard to the role and consequences of America bringing all nations back to Rome.
And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. The final identifying qualification of the Roman power is given in the closing verse of Revelation chapter 13. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
In homage to the papacy, the United States will not be alone. The influence of Rome in the countries that once acknowledged her dominion is still far from being destroyed. Romanism in the Old World and apostate Protestantism in the New will pursue a similar course towards those who honor the divine precepts. When Sunday observance shall be enforced by law, then whoever shall transgress the command of God to obey a precept, which has no higher authority than that of Rome, will thereby honor popery above God. They will thereby accept the sign of allegiance to Rome, the mark of the beast. A power from beneath is working to bring about the last great scenes in the drama. Satan coming as Christ and working with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in those who are binding themselves together in secret societies. Those who are yielding to the passion for confederation are working out the plans of the enemy. The cause will be followed by the effect. While many leaders are active agents of Satan, God also has his agents among the leading men of the nation. When the final warning shall be given, it will arrest the attention of these leading men through whom the Lord is now working, and some of them will accept it.
It is not without reason that God has given us the prophecies of Scripture. They are not a closed book that God has forbidden man to try to understand. The very third verse in the opening chapter of Revelation reads, "Blessed is he that reads, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand." It is truer now than when that statement was spoken by Christ to John 2,000 years ago. The history of this world, as presented in the prophetic image of Daniel chapter 2, reveals that we are living in the very tips of the toes of the kingdoms represented by iron and clay. The stone kingdom of Christ, birthed without human interference, is about to descend from the heavens to re-establish the glorious eternal government of God, to obliterate forever the powers of darkness and the works of iniquity. Which kingdom will you be subject to? Whose mark of authority will be inscribed in the recesses of your brain and manifest in the action of your hands? How long, asked Elijah all those thousands of years ago on Mount Carmel, in the presence of all of Israel, the prophets of Baal, and King Ahab? How long, he asked, halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him.